So, welcome everybody to the special council meeting agenda of Friday, December the 6th. And I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Sinixt people, and is home to the Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. I would also like to comment, as we can see outside, the vigil has been set up over the last few days, that a reminder that here we are 35 years later. On December the 6th of 1989, 14 women were murdered in an act of misogynistic violence at École Polytechnique in Montreal, perpetrated by a man claiming to be fighting feminism. He first opened fire on women in a mechanical engineering class. Women were targeted because of their gender, and 13 students and one administrator were killed. In 1991, the Parliament of Canada designated today, December the 6th, as a National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. Vigils are held across the country to pay tribute to the women who lost their lives in this horrific act. It is also a day to reflect on how gender-based violence occurs today and to act against all forms of gender-based violence. I think it's important that we take the opportunity to make sure that we are speaking out about this type of violence, speaking out about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, intimate partner and sexual violence. And I think key in all of these things is always to be looking for the opportunities to be educating ourselves as we move forward. So at 12:15 today, although we'll be in meetings, there will be a candlelight vigil held in the square outside here of City Hall. But I think it's important that we recognize this day, and you may have noticed coming into the building that we are displaying some white ribbons in the windows of our offices here on this floor, as the white ribbon is the acknowledgement of this day. So thank you for that. So I received no late items, and therefore I'm asking for an adoption of the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Tate, seconded by Councillor Woodward. All those in favor? Thank you. And I'm looking for someone to move adoption of the minutes of previous meetings, special meetings on October the 11th, 22nd, and 25th. Councillor Tate is moving. Councillor Woodward is seconding. Did anybody see any errors or things that needed to be corrected? Seeing no hands up. All those in favor of adopting the minutes? Thank you. And that takes us down to our delegations. So I'd like to call Amy from Nelson Cares up to do a presentation. And I believe we have online, although I'm not seeing anybody in the little corner of the screen I get to look at, but we have, I believe, oh, there you are. Madeline from, thank you, from Macola. Oh, we've got a few. Kayla and Steve. Oh, and Hillary. Woohoo. We got a whole team up there. Whoa, okay. We're golden. Anyways.
You can hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Thank you for checking in.
I will be controlling the presentation, so Amy will just let me know as she needs me to change slides.
Okay, well, I'm just going to hand it over to Amy. And Amy, Councillor Woodward, does she have her little blue button glowing?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, all yours.
Thank you for having us here today. Thanks. So we have a bit of a presentation. I will do the initial slides just talking about Nelson Cares generally and the housing that Nelson Cares provides, and then we'll turn it over to Macola to speak about the proposed project. I'll start with the project team actually. So Nelson Cares has partnered with Cover Architects and Macola Development Services to support this project. Macola will be the development consultant and is a professional development consulting firm, including planners, development managers, and dedicated experts in Indigenous relations and communications. Their services include community planning, land development, development consulting, and project management. Cover Architects is a multidisciplinary firm that provides a range of services from architecture, planning, landscape design, interior design, and industrial design. And the folks from Cover that are working on this project are Robert Stacy and Max Voskupel. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you a little background about Nelson Cares. Some of you may be familiar with some of our services, but we're a nonprofit organization. We were formed in 1974. It was actually originally called Nelson District Community Resources Society, but we were, didn't flow off the tongue. And so it was in the early 2000s, we changed our name to Nelson Cares Society. Our services are client-focused, and we serve the Nelson community. We have a variety of programs and services, including affordable housing and emergency shelter. We also have 2 programs specifically for adults with diverse abilities who are eligible for services through Community Living BC. Those programs are Custom Fit, Inclusion and Employment Services, which last year supported 52 members of our community to achieve their employment, community-based, and supported living goals. We also have services for Community Living, which supports 12 adults with diverse abilities in 3 group homes to live lives that are full and with respect, dignity, and care. The Advocacy Center is another program of Nelson Cares Society. It provides legal advocacy services, including supporting people to access government benefits, deal with tenancy and debt issues, navigate the family law system, apply for legal aid, and access other legal resources. And we also have a community-based victim services program, which offers supports to people who have experienced relationship and sexual violence. And finally, we have Kootenai Seniors, which offers a variety of services to seniors, including light housekeeping visits through the Better at Home program, transportation supports, including a volunteer driver program, resource and referral information, social meals at various locations in the community, and numerous social activities and events at the amenity room at Lakeside Place. So that's just a bit of an overview, in addition to the housing of the services that Nelson Cares provides. And our goal is to work to build a healthy and inclusive community where respect for all individuals is an ordinary, everyday occurrence. So the next slide gives a bit of a, so I'll focus more on our housing services. The next slide gives a bit of an overview of the various buildings that we operate. And I'll go into a bit more detail, but in general, we have affordable rental housing, which ranges from subsidized housing to affordable housing. So, for example, at Cedar Grove Estates, that would be subsidized housing. So people's rents are geared to their income, and so people aren't paying more than 30% of the rent. And BC Housing funds that subsidy. Lakeside Place is what would be considered affordable housing, so it's low market. There aren't subsidies for the folks living at Lakeside Place, but the rents are meant to be affordable. So there's a bit of a range with the rental housing. And then our services for community living, again, has 3 buildings, 3 locations, including within our Hall Street building. One of the group homes is in Hall Street. And they're staffed 24/7 to provide support to the people that live in those homes. Again, all the people that live there are eligible for community services through Community Living BC, so that's how they're referred to our program. Supportive housing, I guess most of you were just out at the North Shore Inn, so you will have seen that, which we're hoping to have tenanted by mid-December, so that's exciting. And so you got a bit of a rundown on what services are provided there. And then finally, there's the emergency shelter Stepping Stones that has 17 beds normally. In the winter, we get additional funding to have 6 emergency beds in the winter just because of the cold weather. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the affordable housing that we provide, because the proposed project would be essentially that. It will look the intention would be that it would look like Hall Street Place. So we have, so Cedar Grove Estates and Copper Mountain Court are both buildings that are in Rosemont. We actually inherited those from the Nelson Housing Society, which originally established those buildings. And then when they decided to cease operations, Nelson Cares started operating those buildings. So Cedar Grove Estates has 22 one-bedroom units for low to moderate income seniors and adults with disabilities, and it also includes 17 townhomes for families. So again, it's subsidized, so tenants pay no more than 30% of their income on rent. Copper Mountain Court is 37 units for low to moderate income families, and again, subsidized rents. Ward Street Place is a little bit different. It is not subsidized at all through BC Housing. Nelson Cares runs that as affordable housing, and it's the commercial tenants, the income from the commercial tenants on the main floor that essentially subsidize the rents, so we can keep those rents affordable for the individuals living there. So we don't get any operating funding to support those rents. It's 39 units, a mix of one bedroom and studios for low-income single adults. Rents range from $400 to $600 a month, including utilities. And we do have a tenant support worker also attached to that building to support some of the tenants there. Hall Street Place is one of our newer buildings, and it's 41 units, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms for a mix of incomes. So we have 9 units for people with very low incomes, so folks who are on income assistance or disability benefits. So they have a fixed rent that's set by BC Housing. And then there's 20 rent geared to income subsidized units. So again, people low to moderate income, and it's no more than 30% of their income. We have 12 market rental units in there, and so that's the 2 3-bedroom community living units. So that's through our services for community living. Folks living also are part of that building. And then finally, Lakeside Place, which that actually has 2 components. So the new building is 47 affordable units for seniors, so 55 plus, and people with disabilities. So again, those aren't subsidized rents; those are affordable rents. And we received funding through BC Housing to subsidize the build, which is what enabled us to keep the rents on the lower end. But the rents themselves aren't subsidized. We are also on that site, though, you'll see there's another building. That's Lakeside Place, but it's homeless at risk. And those are 8 units in there, and those are subsidized units. So that's what the 2 buildings are on the site. And again, the proposed Front Street development would be intended for low to moderate income adults and families, and would follow the same rental model as the Hall Street unit or building. And I think that's the end of, is that the end of my slide? Do I turn it over to you folks now? Okay.
Thanks, Amy. Hello, everybody. My name is Hillary Morgan. I'm a professional planner and a member of the Macola team working in the interior region. I'll walk you through some of the details of the schematic design and sort of program for the building. In terms of who the housing is for, the development would be funded through BC Housing's Community Housing Fund, and it has a pretty specific requirement in terms of rental rates. So it requires that 30% of the units are near market rent. So in Nelson, that would be anywhere from around $750 to $1,300 per month. 50% of the units need to be below market, following the rent geared to income formula, where people pay 30% of their income to rent and shelter. In order to qualify, people have to be below a certain income threshold. And then 20% of the units would be deeply affordable for people who are typically earning less than $30,000 a year. Also should note all of these rents are based on household income. So the proposed development includes 50 units. So when you apply the CHF formula, that would require 15 of the units to be near market rentals, 25 to be rent geared to income, and 10 deeply affordable. Currently, the design includes 14 studio units, 32 one-bedroom, 2 two-bedrooms, and 2 3-bedrooms. This could potentially change as we're in fairly early design stages. The development is located at 818 and 824 Front Street. It's currently zoned institutional and designated in the official community plan as institutional, as it's right next to the Nelson District Community Complex. The proposed building is 6 stories and would include the affordable housing as well as a proposed 5,000 square foot expansion of the Nelson District Community Complex recreation space. This next slide illustrates the current ownership. So the property on the corner is owned by the City of Nelson, and then the property between the NDCC and the property next to it is owned by RDCK. Currently, the RDCK is conducting community engagement to better understand the types of uses that the community would like to see in the recreational expansion. This slide shows a site plan for the proposed building. The western wall of the building would connect to the NDCC space, and the site has been designed so that it does not impact the Zamboni access to the arena. This schematic provides an overview of how each level of the building is used. So the blue is showing level 3, where the proposed NDCC recreation expansion would be. And it's on the 3rd floor, and it has double height ceilings. So a single floor, but with double height ceilings. The green areas are all residential uses, and then the orange areas are parking. So the first 2 levels are parking with proposed residential usage along the front street to activate the street frontage. Our next few slides just to go through kind of each level of the building. So on level 1, there are 24 parking spaces. On level 2, there are 21 parking spaces, and lots of bicycle storage space. So in total, there are 45 vehicle spaces and 50 units in the building. This is showing the proposed recreation area and the residential uses. Again, the proposed NDCC area would be on level 3 with double height ceilings, and then level 3 and 4 would include residential uses. And then level 5 and 6 are all 100% residential use. In terms of how the project is being funded, currently Nelson Cares has pre-development funding from BC Housing, which is supporting due diligence, feasibility analysis, and schematic design work. And all that work is to help prepare Nelson Cares for the upcoming BC Housing Community Housing Fund call for proposals, which we're expecting to open in early 2025. In terms of our project timeline, we are currently at the step where we will be submitting a rezoning application. And then in the new year, when we hear about the CHF fund opening, we will prepare an application and hopefully hear back within a few months and be able to move the project forward from there. And that is the end of our presentation. So we are happy to take any questions.
Councillor Page, followed by Councillor Lockenberg.
Yeah, thanks for the update. I have a couple questions. I've seen many of these materials before, and some of the things that I haven't seen quite answered. Can you tell me a little bit more about the consideration of the street frontage and how that is, what are the design considerations going into how we activate that sidewalk, given that there's crosswalks and we're having new waterfront amenities and pedestrian ways, and how does that fit into the design considerations here?
To be honest, it's pretty early schematic design. We don't have any renderings or sort of detailed designs yet. But part of the reason that the design proposes residential on that ground floor is to activate the street and create some ground-oriented uses. So we've been researching the zoning bylaw and official community plan, and getting a good understanding of the vision for the community. And we know the city is also currently going through a new OCP update, so we will be taking all that into consideration as we refine the design.
So, if I may, Mayor? Yeah, just pointing out a few things about the development of the Hall Street project. I know there was some advocation from leadership at that time about the pedestrian connection to the campus in between the buildings along the pool there, and just elements that were put in place to really integrate people with the sidewalk and make sure that these buildings weren't barriers. We already have a highway there, but you don't want to lean into a big boxy element that doesn't really invite a beautiful street corner, whatever ends up happening here. So it's early design phases, so I guess that's just commentary. The other piece, I'm a little surprised or eager to see a bigger mix of 2 bedrooms, just because 2 and 3, because we often see within our needs assessments over the last 6 years, highlighted continually, the lack of 2 and 3 bedroom homes as being the place we don't see a lot of support, and so seeing only a number of units on each category. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what would push this project to see more multi-bedroom units put into it?
Sure. I might. Is it okay if I quickly just share my screen to share one image that might give a better concept for how to activate the streetscape? It's very again schematic level, but just give me 1 second. Also, I don't know if Cover is in the room, but if they are,
No, they're not.
Amy,
There's nobody
no, they're
from
not.
here.
Okay.
No.
Okay, that's okay. All right. Can everybody see this sort of massing with the yellow bump out? Yeah. So this was one of the pieces of material that Cover has put together to sort of demonstrate some ideas for how that bump out where the NDCC expansion is could really create some interest in the building and give a nod to the actual use and that kind of community recreation use element in the space. So not saying this is exactly what it would look like or what they would do, but just seeing an opportunity there for, some interesting architectural element. And I'll just jump back to the question about the housing needs report. We've had quite a bit of discussion about this. I think Nelson Cares has expressed that some of their larger bedroom units have been difficult to rent. Generally speaking, the current housing needs report does demonstrate the highest need for those smaller household types, especially singles and single parents who have just a single income. So I think that's the main rationale. I don't know, Amy, if you have anything to add on that front from a housing need perspective and multiple bedroom units.
I don't have anything further to add to what Hillary said.
So, single parents, kids don't get their own bedroom?
They do.
Well, just for the 2
Yeah, I guess.
bedroom?
Yeah, there's 2 bedrooms and 2 3 bedrooms currently in the design. And I suppose seniors is another important demographic group to think about that the Community Housing Fund is focused on. Also, BC Housing has fairly strong accessibility and adaptability standards, so typically 5% of the units are built to be fully accessible.
Sorry, if I may, the housing needs report that you guys just finished for us certainly stated that there was, made a point of stating there was a shortfall in multi-bedroom and family-sized units. So I guess I'm just curious what the relation is. If we're getting a report back that says that there's a shortfall of those and we need more of those, but then Nelson Cares is saying that they are having troubles actually renting or leasing those, maybe could just discuss that a bit
Yeah.
and understand that sort of difference of opinions, it would seem, or experience versus opinion?
I think that the housing needs report, when you look at the affordability analysis that compares what people can afford on the market compared to their incomes, I think it's demonstrating a need across the board. The obviously people who are single and only have a single income have less ability to pay higher rent, so there was a really strong need identified there. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Just a reminder that, so the report that was done by the other arm of your corporation told us that we
Yeah.
had a shortage of 3-bedroom, sort of family-style units, and so, but then there's a problem. Have you been having problems? I'm looking now
Oh,
at
sorry.
Amy, renting the 3-bedroom that they have in the place currently. So like, where is we hear we need
Yeah.
this, but nobody wants one? Like,
No,
they're
yeah, sorry,
hard to rent somehow.
sorry, there you go, now you got it back.
I lost my train of thought for a second there, but what I was going to mention was that there is income thresholds for these units. So households have to be below a certain income threshold. So it's possible that those, families that are really in need of housing exceed those income thresholds. That could be one explanation.
I might also add that, based on the study that we did, nearly a quarter of all single people did not have their housing needs met. And single people are one of the largest household groups in Nelson. So I think the study did identify that there was a lack of larger family-sized units, but not to the exclusion of the need for single person households. And that paired with the on-the-ground demand that Nelson Cares is seeing led the organization to target studios and 1-beds. Doesn't mean that there's not a need. I think that's just what that is the demographic that they're seeing coming to Cares for housing.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Lockenberg, you're next, then Councillor Ward.
Thank you.
So I'll build on that and then get to my question. So building on that, it seems to me I would prefer, just given what the housing needs assessment says, that we do put more emphasis on the value of 2- and 3-bedroom houses because, one, they're more flexible. Like you can have a bunch of people going in on a single unit and sharing bedrooms, which I think is a great thing. I mean, I did that for 10 years.
Don't think in the
BC Housing doesn't
BC
allow
Housing doesn't
that.
allow that?
Yeah,
Won't fit in the model.
that's not the
It's not a
case.
family unit.
Something we should lobby
according to
for,
BC
maybe.
Housing.
Okay, the other thing I was going to say related to that is that the value of, especially that location close to the NDCC for young people. So even though the maybe overall demand is more heavy on the studio and single bedroom, for that location, it seems to me what a great location for young people to be able to access all of those rec facilities as well as the youth center and everything else. So just I want to add to the consideration to put more emphasis on those units on a comparison basis. But my question is related to the 30%, 50%, 20% on near market, below market, and deeply affordable. So how does that work if I come in, I've got a job I'm working at Safeway, minimum wage, then I go up to management, my salary goes up. I assume my rent goes up too, and so you're supplying like a income tax on a yearly?
Everyone who has subsidized rent has an annual rent review, and they have to provide all of their income documents, and then their rents are adjusted if there's any changes up or down in their incomes. So that's how that works.
Is there ever kind of an unintended incentive structure that's set up where is there like the possibility of losing, like, so for example, if everybody shifts, or should it not be a goal to shift as much as you can, shift that percentage towards being near market. Because what it would suggest is that everybody who's currently occupying it are raising their income to the point where now the entire thing is near market. Is that something you talk about? Or do you just then, if you get up there, we plan to shift people out and then bring new people in?
Yeah, and I have to say, in our experience, it's not usually the case that people no longer become eligible because their income has grown so much that they're no longer eligible for affordable housing. You know, we have various folks living in our places, but, you know, people with disabilities, seniors, those kinds of folks, they may not see that kind of change. And additionally, people that are working, you know, sometimes it's only gonna go so high. And I don't think there's any disincentive built into it. I can say all the people living in our buildings are working hard to just do the best they can. But it's, you know, as we all know, just rent is so expensive, the cost of living is so expensive. So it would be very rare that we would have someone in our building that would take such a large leap in their income that they would no longer be eligible. It would be more they would just see shifts in their rent. It's possible.
Yeah, no.
If I can add quickly, the program also, the rent geared to income and deep subsidy units, you do have to be below the housing income limits technically. Now, operationally on the ground, that there's the Residential Tenancy Act that needs to be considered. However, technically, if your income exceeds a certain level, that is not necessarily in line with the way that program will work. So there is sort of a bit of an income limit established for those units as well.
So you will be asked to leave at some point if your income goes too high.
The society would work with tenants to make sure that they have a suitable alternative, and then yes, a part of the agreement would be looking to move someone along and put that unit out to someone that is lower income. The other thing is within that building, there is that 30% low end of market. So perhaps also on attrition, that person moves into the low end of market category, and the vacant unit goes into that subsidized realm, right? So there's flexibility built within that 30, 50, 20.
Right. Okay. So may I have supplementary? Sure. So then, using Ward Street Place as a case study, how that $400 to $600 a month rent, has that changed over the last 20 years or?
And I couldn't give you the exact numbers. I haven't been involved with up until recently. I've mostly been working through the Advocacy Center, but I've been with the organization for 26 years. So I have some knowledge, but there's some details I don't know. But I can say, yes, I believe the rents have gone up somewhat. Probably when it was first open, they were a bit lower, but really not very much. The rents haven't gone up very much there.
And the turnover at Ward Street Place?
There's some. It's not high. Often the people that end up moving into Ward Street Place may be transitioning from another program at Nelson Cares, for example, the shelter or the transitional accommodation program at the shelter. So we do see some turnover, but not high. Many of the folks that live there have lived there for many, many years. Yeah.
Right. If I may, just to finish the thought. Sorry, just to finish the thought. So I remember when, was it this term or previous term, we had a presentation from, I think, BC Housing about a project in Kamloops. And it was really, they were really talking about sort of the ladder. Like, we really wanted to get people up and keep things moving. And I asked somebody at the time, like, well, what are the things that are getting people stuck? Like, where do they get stuck on this ladder? And if it's kind of an incentive-driven ladder, if the propulsion of that ladder is a set of incentives along the way, is that how you all think about it? Like trying to keep things moving through incentive? Or what does move that ladder? Like, what's the engine driving it?
Well, it really depends on the individual. I would say you know, many of the people that live in our buildings, like Ward Street Place, have some sort of a disability, a lifelong, and it's going to create a life, you know, they're going to have challenges that many of us don't have to deal with, right? And so the goals and the ladder look different for different people, right? And so what success looks like for one person, maybe getting, you know, success could be getting a really well-paying job, you know, no longer needing affordable housing, but for other people, success can just be maintaining their housing, you know, having a small part-time job, getting to their appointments. It really varies depending on the needs of the individual. So we try to work with the people individually. And I would say Ward Street Place is different. Like our other housing units, like Hall Street Place, like Cedar Grove, those folks, that's independent living. It's not supportive housing. We don't case manage the people that live there. We have a tenancy agreement with them. We do that. If they need supports, like we don't just abandon them. We try to support the people, but there's not like a case manager that works with people in those buildings. That's how it differs from something like the North Shore Inn, or like I said, at Ward Street Place, we do have a tenant support worker there to help people sort of establish goals, work on things, you know, and try to meet the goals depending on where they are. But we try to meet people where they're at, and you know, so their goals are going to vary. But our other buildings, like I said, people are living independently. It's not supportive housing. We're not case managing the people that are living there. So in that way, what we're trying to do, I mean, the foundation for so many people that may be experiencing challenges, and everyone's challenges are kind of different. Like there's such a variety of people living in our buildings. It's just that housing is such a basic need, and if you don't have your housing, it's really hard to everything else kind of falls apart, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so by providing affordable housing, it just gives people a foundation to get on with their lives and do the things they need to do.
So not to mischaracterize you, this is at least in part permanent housing.
It may, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's what I'm trying to. Thanks.
Councillor Woodward, I have Councillor Page for a second time. I just want to be, again, cautious of time here. We've gone over what we were allotting, and I want to make sure that if each councillor has a go-round.
I have a very
So
specific question.
I'm going you, then I'm going Tate, because she hasn't spoken, and then I'll see Paige where we are.
Okay. My specific question is, when I'm looking at the bedroom topology here, I'm wondering, and this might be just naive to ask, but can you develop in a building like this, like say a studio that could be turned into a one-bedroom through pulling out some kind of like tucked away wall so that somebody wouldn't have to like leave, or that there'd be more flexibility in a space, or that let's say somebody's living in a one-bedroom. Well, once somebody's living in a studio and they have a child, they have a baby, and then they need a little space to have a little bedroom, and that's convertible. Is that ever something that happens in buildings like this? Convertible spaces to add to flexibility?
I think it's talked about, especially in the context of multi-generational living and that type of thing, but I've personally never seen a BC housing building with that sort of lock-off unit option. Kayla, have you ever?
No, I would say that's not typically a part of designing a building like this, but I think the value of working with a not-for-profit like Nelson Cares is that they do have a portfolio and potentially would have the opportunity to work with their tenants on finding another suitable unit. They also have deep connections with other housing providers and can use those relationships as well to assist when there are those changes. And that is a typical approach of many not-for-profits. Yeah.
I just thought that, like, you know, having some flexibility and maybe some units where that you could change it from one to the other might be beneficial in such a tight market like we have.
And just to clarify too, like if someone is in a studio and they have a child, it's not like, oh, you have to be out right now. Like,
Yes.
or same with if somebody's child, you know, moves out because
Yeah.
they're an adult. Again, it's not just like, okay, sorry, you're out next month. We work with people and ideally, yeah, if we can find another suitable unit within one of our buildings that the person would like to move to, then we try to work with folks to help them find.
Okay, just a
appropriate
query,
housing.
thank you.
Counselor Tate.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for the work you guys are doing on this. I know there's lots of chatter in the community and everybody wants to see the best use of all of our spaces. I have a curiosity about parking, because if we're looking at adding rec space, then we're adding people visiting the rec space. And I have a curiosity about parking for the units as well. This is less parking than what was presented with the test fit the last time we looked at it. And so I'm just wondering, like, from a planning perspective, just looking at our community and the other challenges that we have, especially if we're looking to bring more people to the rec campus and use those spaces to a better, higher use, more frequent use, and more people down there, then we're gonna have to be thinking about where the people are gonna park. And this looks like it's not one per unit. Is that correct? Like, it's less, right?
That's my understanding, but I'll let Makola address that.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
45 to 50, 5 less.
So, yes, so it's less parking than the number of units, and that doesn't even take into account the people visiting the rec space. So I definitely have a concern about that. I don't think that's good planning on our part. I don't think we should be planning to build more rec space without more places for people to park to get to that rec space. I don't know how we address it from a planning perspective, but I don't think we can go forward with that as the plan. I don't know how to address that. I'm new. That's a concern for me. I wanted to just touch again on Councillor Page's point about the front streetscape. I know that we're not at the streetscaping portion of this yet, but that's really important. That I know that we have challenges moving the snow off the highway there because of the other building. It's challenging to get people to be able to walk on that sidewalk in the winter to move the snow, and then you can't access the stairs to those street front units. So, like, just from a planning perspective, we need to be planning these things just a little bit better. We're good, we're smart, we can do it. We need to be looking at snow removal, we need to be looking at parking, we need to be looking at how all the people are getting around these new structures. And I'm also curious about the height, because 6 stories is, it's kind of like 6 stories on one side, but more like 4.5 stories on the other side. And does that fit in our bylaw? That's like the fit with the bylaw? Is that the right height? Is it bigger than the bylaw?
We have not looked at it. We haven't received the application, and
Okay.
we will do that.
Right, okay, so I just don't want to be like false promising plans like this, because every step of the way we kind of like, oh yeah, it's just a plan, oh, it's just a massing study, this isn't the details yet, don't you worry, and we kind of like scooch it along without pulling it back first and really making sure that we're doing the best and the highest. Every time the best and the highest, and that's more expensive, I know it is. But I want to make sure that every time we're doing the best and the highest, whether it's for parking or EVs or bicycles or snow removal, streetscaping, everybody loves living here, and we want to continue to keep loving here. So I don't want to say, oh yeah, this looks good, it'll come closer as we get closer to the actual date. I want to pull it back before we do the next step. We need to look at the height, we need to look at the snow removal, we need to look at the parking. That's my comment. It's not really a question. It's like, just slow her down.
So
Go
this
ahead.
has to come to council for rezoning
Yes.
first, right? So,
Yes.
So there's a process that
Right.
will come along. So I think that's good feedback to to the proponents. But there's a process that this will.
Right.
We haven't even looked at the the current proposal. So
Right.
Maybe Amy or Ron, what's the experience with Hall Street Place in terms of the number of parking stalls and the occupancy of those? Because that's a good parallel of, and I don't know if that was considered in the design at this stage. Sometimes we're trying to manage parking that we're not overbuilding parking, and I hear you're concerned about underbuilding parking. Right now, I think this parking is tied to the the residential uses and not the recreation uses.
It's not. There is a calculation for recreational
Okay.
in the previous presentation.
So we're trying to find that ultimately not overbuilding parking, because parking is expensive, and if it's not utilized, then it doesn't make sense to build it. So I don't know what the experience with Hall Street Place in terms of the number of parking stalls that we ended up with that and what the utilization is, but maybe we can bring that to you in the future, because I think that's some of the things that our planning staff will look at. I think we relaxed the parking somewhat on Hall Street Place when that was built, because it had a mix of seniors and others that may not have had vehicles, but I don't recall the details of that.
Thank you.
Counselor, I'm just checking in. Counselor Panero or Counselor Payne, again, I'm looking at time before I go to Counselor Page for a second time. Counselor Payne.
Just one comment around parking. It may have been at the SHARE presentation on their project where they talked about the fact that when you're in a deeply subsidized unit, it's not as common to own a vehicle. So the concept of having some sort of car sharing, and I would take that further to bike sharing, looking at a 58 bicycle parking lot for that size of unit sounds like sharing as we move forward. I feel that we have less resources to create all of these things. So 10, 20, 30 years from now, how many vehicles is each person going to be able to own and move forward? But those deeply subsidized units and even subsidized units, there's less of a likelihood that we've seen at both Share and Hall Street to own those vehicles. And if we can encourage people, especially in the downtown core like this, to utilize active transportation and public transit and some form of vehicle sharing, then parking becomes more available to individuals coming into that one-to-one that we're used to. Many communities are moving away from that completely as a parking model.
Okay, sure.
I'm going to make some fly-by-night comments. To the parking, I think that's true and fair, but I think in design with the partners, it comes down to how flexible is that parking to then be leveraged for recreational uses. If it's all squared away in a private area and only half of it's being used and it's all going, there's not full utilization, or we can't improve the parking situation down there for recreation purposes, I think those are design choices that are considered. And that's true of also the bicycle parking. Does that help the rec center have more bicycle parking, or does it just get locked away and it's only for residents? So it's like the shared use pieces.
Put in floor hockey.
Other places I'm looking, when final proposals come forward for shared uses, is how that improves the access on that side where the mural is. We have, the rec center, the common area. More people will be on this side of the building now if this is what goes through. So how are the design elements considering how that is a welcoming space on that other side of the pocket of the rec center, which I think the original Hall Street building did a really nice job of encapsulating that corner and framing the green space, and it just really kind of completes the interior on that side. And so you're looking for the same kind of, small accommodations, rounded edges, making a pocket there. Something I've really been hearing from community groups as they get exposed to this project and they think about what, freehand, what could be down there for recreation is, and the city manager mentioned this at the last presentation, is that there potentially could be more recreation space. I'm familiar with the 30% for the BC Housing, but as we do the feasibility studies and we look at the different options, it would be a benefit, I think, to have an A, B scenario that if there was other funding that came along to double the rec space or to have a childcare space on that ground floor. I think there's a lot in the community that I keep hearing about the original kind of footprint being predominantly for community benefit, with the airspace being predominantly for housing. And so I think there might at least have to be some discussion and some scenarios in these developments, so these costings of what a scenario looks like if there's more than the 5,000 square feet. And we then need to figure out how to fund that, and that's a different question, but I think we need to be able to see it. And finally, this type of project, Fell Street, the opportunity down at Cottonwood, came from economic development in a pursuit of how do we support the strategic priority that kept floating up to the list for years around workforce housing and the limit and how it's holding back our economic prosperity here in the community. And so for that, it would be very curious, again, when we look at the 5,000 square feet in that 30%, Are there an opportunity to carve out a couple of units specifically for recruitment around childcare, early educators as an identified priorities? Police are having issues with recruitment and identified priorities. Healthcare workers has been identified as a priority for bringing people to the community and getting them transitioned into their final destination. And so I'd love staff and Nelson Cares to have discussions about how some of the units could be put aside for specific purposes to meet some of those other strategic goals. Because I think that also adds to the multi-use, multi-benefit, co-benefit piece of it. So if there's any commentary, I'll receive it. I just wanted to make sure we were planting those seeds clearly with everybody.
Yeah, I just want to say, Councillor Page, that in terms of the funding from BC Housing, it is pretty rigid in this 20, 30, 50, and unless there are ideas about this particular fund that this group, I shouldn't speak on their behalf, but those guidelines are pretty rigid, and although I appreciate that there's a housing crisis when we are looking at people that have significant wage, I think that it becomes difficult if we go back to BC Housing and saying that we're holding units for fire and police officers who are making $100,000 a year when we have a multitude of people that aren't hardly making 20, and I have one lovely senior who writes me at least every second day to tell me about his $23,000 that he's living on, that he can, barely buy food on a given month. So I think we want to be cautious about our asks when these groups are coming, and that maybe we should ask another nonprofit or in another proposal. But this proposal, given the funding pot that they're trying to look for, has very strict requirements around the 20, 30, 50. So that would be my only concern. But I hear your comment on that we have to, as you know, I support housing across the full spectrum into even the multi-million-dollar homes, because that's a broad spectrum of housing. So just to be cautious. Councillor Tate, I'm going to go to you for, is it one short last comment? 'Cause
Yes.
we are way over time now, just to remind people that we try to be timely in these meetings, but
Yeah,
I just want, we've wanted Nelson Cares to come. I'm allowing this time.
thank you.
I would hopefully, maybe if you have other questions about their organization or whatever, this development is still really kind of, because it hasn't come to, like, our planning department can't comment on it because they don't have anything to comment on. It's still kind of a napkin drawing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Well, that's my point, though, is that napkin drawings kind of start to go through the process, and then we get the napkin drawing as well. We've been looking at it for so long already.
Yep.
So this is a new one that just popped up for me, the 30%. Like, I've known the 30%, but I really would like to drill into those numbers, because I don't understand if it's 30%. I know it has to be non-residential, so like the hallways and the elevators. Is the parking part of that 30%? And is it 30% because it's double height for the, like, I don't know who to ask, but I want those numbers. I want to understand what 30%. Is it just area 30%, like floor? Or does that, because it's double height? Like, I have questions about that. I have a curiosity now that Councillor Page brought it up about, I know we're in proposal stage, right? So it's great that there's money for the proposal and the feasibility, but also, once we have a proposal and feasibility, it's possible that it might be more appropriate for a different pot of money if we're trying to meet our housing needs, which our very same housing needs report is saying for families and 2 bedrooms. So I have a curiosity around that as well. Just trying to see how we can best use the space and try to understand it. And this is a very new process for me, kind of digging it. And we'll know more when we get to the planning department. But just to have these things in your mind for your architect and for the engagement that we're doing, please. Thanks.
So in terms of commenting on the 30%, it's about whether or not the project can lever financing from BC Housing. So the restriction would be if the mortgage were to encompass the entire building, that's where that 30% rule comes in. If you bring your own cash, that offsets, that takes that out of that. It is not an easy thing to define. It is 30% of the physical building, but BC Housing will also, and CMHC, who has part of the rule because they do the loan insurance, they'll look at the total loan. So it's also 30% of the cost. So we kind of have to balance both of those components if that financing is to cover the entirety of the project, including the recreational space.
Oh, that's awesome, because that means that there's like all sorts of space to look for partnerships, collaborations, like go slow to go fast.
The one thing I would caution is that there is one more, for sure, funding call from BC Housing that's going to happen in early 2025.
Okay.
And then after that, we don't know when there's going to be another funding call. Will it be subsidized? And if we don't have a firm plan laid out, I do not believe we would have a high chance of success in our funding application. And part of that would be rezoning, like fully rezoned or really far down that path. If we don't have the zoning in place, that severely weakens our application, and all of those things feed into making a final decision around that recreational space. So that is just one of my cautions I want to put out there.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank Amy and the team from Macola for joining us this morning. And I'm sure that we will be having you back. And I think you've heard some ideas and some concerns around the table that you can also have in your discussions going forward as we see what happens with this plan. And I look forward to having you back probably early in the new year to hear further on how this project is looking and rolling out. So,
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
I
Bye.
okay, so item number 7 is a resolution to close the meeting to the public. And it is the opinion of the council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and staff and any approved audiences be excluded from this meeting, and that the meeting of council continue under section 91E on matters regarding the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. Could I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Woodward, seconded by Councillor Page. All those in favor? Can I have a hand on that side, please? Thank you. And that carries.
Just got to check in with here, because we got to make sure as well that our speakers are up to play in the meeting room there, otherwise.
So, Keith, probably the BC Builds project that Chamber's doing has way more flexibility to
Yeah.
that type of thing. We have had some discussions with them around that.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking like around so you're thinking putting
distinguished mayor who is also part of the police board. So thanks again for having us this morning. We're just going to start, I guess, this afternoon. Going to start with just some opening comments from our Nelson Police Board, and Director Christine Daynaka is speaking on behalf of the board. So many of you may not know Christine yet or have met her, but she's new to the board. Along with Matt Nuttall, who started just recently as well, and we've actually had quite a few new directors over the past year, so it's probably a few new faces for everybody. So Director Christine Daynaka is a lawyer with expertise in regulatory compliance, administrative law, and ethics. Her background includes experience in social work, healthcare, and law. She's also served on multiple boards. Director Daynaka has a master's law from University of Edinburgh, a Juris Doctor from the University of British Columbia, and a Bachelor of Social Work from University of Calgary. And that's just a short summary of all the things she's been involved with and done, but I'll turn the mic over to Christine now just for the, as I said, opening comment.
Thank you, Chief. And I do want to acknowledge the support of the board who are here today in the gallery. And I am just going to start with a few opening remarks, and mainly just to set context for the Chief's presentation. Partly this is, because I am also new, and it always helps me to have the context of, why are we here and what is the connection between the budget and the police board. So just as a reminder, because I'm sure everyone here is aware of this, under the Police Act, the Board of Directors has certain duties, and those duties are to, think about, are required to, look at the establishment of the police department in a way that it can enforce laws, maintain law and order in the municipalities, and prevent crime. And this is connected to duties of the municipality, which are, the duties of the municipality are that, the municipality bears expenses necessary for funding the police in their area in order to ensure that adequate public safety is met. And that includes not only for the budget purposes of, resourcing and capacity, but also for equipment and services. And the reason I just wanted to sort of set that stage is, the board has taken very seriously its obligations as board members to create a budget that meets the legal requirements that it has to, support a functioning police in this community. And certainly from the municipal perspective, from a funding and budget perspective, I just want you to know that, we have really considered the best approach when putting this budget presentation forward today. And the other thing to be aware of is, in addition to the legal requirements, we have recently developed a strategic plan, and that was with input from the board and the department, but also the community, and I think that's a really important aspect of the strategic planning process. And there's three main pillars, and one is people and culture, and that includes employee support, performance management, and employee development. And I'm highlighting that because as we go through the budget today, you will hear references to why this is important, in addition to the other strategic directions that are identified in that plan. So the plan was also an important component of what was considered when the budget was developed. So basically, to summarize before I give it back to the chief to speak to the budget, is that this is based on legal requirements under the Police Act, the strategic plan objectives, and at the end of the day, I believe it's in the interest of the municipality and certainly from the police board perspective that we have a budget that supports a functioning, sustainable, and professional workforce that can effectively support public safety and community well-being. And, you know, just to set the last sort of stage here, the Nelson Police Department is at a critical crossroads, and so that's why we feel very strongly about the budget we're presenting today as something that is necessary to continue proper functioning and meet not only the strategic plan objectives, but the legal requirements that I started out with. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I did forget to mention at the beginning, if you see Christine get up and sneak out, she had a prior engagement at 1:30, so she likely is going to have to leave fairly shortly. So I just wanted to start with our mission, vision, and values. Again, the mission of the department is preserve the quality of life in our community, prevent crime, preserve the peace, and protect lives and property, enforce the laws of Canada in a just and impartial, equitable manner. So a safe community through policing excellence is our vision. So a few stats just to kind of set some background for the department and what we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. The Crime Severity Index, I believe everybody's fairly familiar with that. I know we had a pretty good talk about it last year. So violent crimes from 2020 to 2022, you can see has been on a fairly significant increase. It was up 44% from 2020. Fortunately, we saw a small drop in that trend this past year, dropped 1.4%. I do want to caveat this though with, with saying that I still think it's a very safe community. The numbers I think have seen what I would call a significant jump based on a couple of one-time incidents. That does have a significant impact when you don't have a lot of violent crime and then 1 or 2 years. And unfortunately, for probably 3 or 4 years, there's been a bit of a blip and a little bit of an increase. But again, that's, it only takes a couple of incidents when you have a pretty low violent crime rate to start with to see that increase. So, I just want to say that so it's not overly alarming, but, we do not want to see that trend continue either. Nonviolent and property crime severity index, the 2023 increase went from a score of 90 to a score of 115. So that was almost a 28% increase. So we definitely see that as being an issue that we are trying to get on top of. Property crime has had an impact on the community.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess my question is why? Why is this happening? Why is it in our community? I know there is a lot of issues with the drug issue on the street and people's mental health and all these combining factors, but these are pretty large jumps, and I'm just kind of wondering, what do you think is happening?
There's a couple of driving factors behind that. I don't want to always put everything back on COVID, but there was a significant decrease in all kinds of activity and interactions during that COVID phase. So coming out of that, there's naturally going to be a spike. You're just not going to prevent that. But I would say that there's, the decrim certainly has had an impact on it. Some of the housing pressures on the community, a lot of people are living unhoused and trying to survive. I know there's always the argument of how many services do you provide? The less fortunate, the addictions and mental health clientele, the unhoused, and whether or not that draws people to the community. There's arguments for both ways. I think there is some level of attracting people to the community when there's those services, so that's a factor. And I think the final thing is just the fact that without being too critical, but we've spoken on it before, that the justice system has that revolving door effect where when you've got a chronic high risk and habitual offender in the community, it's very hard to remove them. And unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've had some significant, repeat offenders that drive the numbers up. So that's the final piece, I would say, in that puzzle.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and the next table just kind of shows the criminal code incidents that are the numbers for Nelson. We provided a comparator to the sort of two bigger areas, bigger police departments on the municipal policing side of things. As you can see, Nelson does rank quite high. And again, just to remind everyone, this does not take into account the seriousness of the crimes. It's just criminal activities. So, Vancouver per se is significantly less criminal code incidents per 100,000 people, but that doesn't mean that there's possibly the criminal code incidents in Vancouver were more serious than here. So it's just a straight raw data numbers of occurrences. You can see Central Saanich and Oak Bay Police Departments, which are comparable in size to Nelson, had about a quarter of the incidents that we have here. So calls for service, I think, is a key measurement that we like to show, because it does take time. Every call that officers respond to take up person's hours during a shift, and again, being short-staffed or short on specific shifts, those calls increase exponentially per officer working. So in 2022, the call volume for the Nelson Police Department increased almost 13% from the previous year. 2023, the call volume increased just over 13% from the previous year. And in 2024, with where we're at today, and we projected just the numbers to finish off the year, taking into account that December is generally a slower month than, say, July or August, we're going to be around 7,750 calls by the end of the year. So that's a 7.5% increase over last year. So we're seeing, on average, over a 10% increase on volume of calls and workload for the department every year. The authorized strength of the department is currently at 23 police officers. The city population, per the city population website, is 11,467. And I know I've looked at a couple websites and everybody's somewhat different by a couple hundred people. So, that certainly is not 100% accurate, but I think it gives you a general idea. The crime rate is 67. It's another metric, but that's the second highest, in particular with the municipal policing side of things. As I mentioned, we have over 7,700 calls of service, and the caseload per officer is highest in BC. And again, I'll just remind everyone that's averaged over the police officers on paper in the department. So with vacancies and people off sick, that number obviously increases per officer. So again, increased call volume, increased CSI, and a heavy caseload just increases the risk to the department. This slide, you may remember from last year. So this is actually from last year's budget presentation, and I'm just going to kind of probably go over this in a little more detail, because I know there was quite a few questions about it, and my goal isn't to make it overly confusing, but I just kind of wanted to give a visual of what the department needs minimum to continue to operate. So we have calculated, and this is going back to probably 2022, we've determined that the department needs 25 officers to function properly. That's maintaining a minimum strength, minimum people coming to work of 15 officers. So every frontline platoon or watch needs 2 constables and a supervisor on it. So that's 3 per shift, and we have 2 shifts a day shift and a night shift. So we need 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and then it's split into 2 platoons. So when one is off, the other platoon is obviously working. So that equates to 12 frontline officers to do basically the bare minimum of responding to calls and maintaining public safety. On top of that, the investigations that are more complex, so there's a number of different child abuse or exploitation exploitation investigations right now that we consider very serious, and we need some sustained investigators on that aren't responding to calls. Domestic violence, aggravated assaults, there's some significant frauds and other type of economic crime files that are happening that go to our GIS section. And realistically, for that to function properly, we need 3 people in there as well. And that allows us to have keep up with the volume of calls that come in and the investigations that need to be conducted by them. So that's the base of where we need coming to work. Now, obviously, people have holidays that they need to take. People have mandatory training that the province mandates us to do, so we can't not do it. We also try very hard to get the officers some additional training on top of that to develop their skills. We do have a pretty junior department, so I think the training is going to be, exceptionally important over the next couple of years to develop those investigative skills and knowledge for our relatively junior workforce that has come on board over the past 2 years. So with 15 officers, to manage and maintain frontline coverage requires 2 extra constables per platoon. If you'll recall, we calculated that to cover off the average sick time for the past couple of years, just the mandatory training requirements and holidays, the department needed 7 extra people. There was 7, the equivalent of 7 full-time positions needed to cover those periods off. So that would include 1 extra constable for the 4 watches, 1 extra NCO for the platoon, and that would give a total of 3 NCOs and, it would be 12 constables plus the 2 constables in GIS, so 14 constables. So again, as per the previous year's presentations, we require 7 additional on top of the 14, plus the 3 leadership team members for a total of 25 officers for the department. So again, this is from last year's presentation. This is what the org chart for the department would look like given the staffing levels we requested. I will point out, and we were asked about this, and I should have adjusted it slightly for the presentation, but again, this is sort of the ideal makeup of the department that we're still striving for in the next couple of years, with the 2 corporals per watch, because ultimately with the 3 NCOs, that allows 1 to be away at any given time and still leaves 2 NCOs working, so you have a supervisor on the days and a supervisor on the nights. So, I would just like to, and not to pick on any company in particular or select anyone, but just, what other business or what other store, like Walmart, for example, would have staff working with no supervision in the store? So right now we're asking our officers to work evenings and weekends a fair bit of the time and a fair bit more of the time than we should be without any supervision. And again, you look back to my earlier comments about just the junior makeup that we have of the current department. That's a significant risk to the members themselves and potential complaints or investigations, and it's also a risk to the public. So, we feel that there needs to be at least another senior officer and preferably an NCO who has the authority to make decisions and give direction and advice. Admin and support staff is another area that we haven't looked at in the past couple of budget requests, but we do feel that we looked into it and there's not been any admin or support staff added to the department since 2002. The department's workload continues to grow, as I've mentioned. The reporting and disclosure requirements continue to become complex and time-consuming, keeping officers in the office and off the roads, which is where we don't want them to be. They need to be out there, but currently the provincial standards, down through the Attorney General, the Crown Prosecutor's offices and stuff, continue to I would say just increased demands and expectations on not only the quality of work that is supplied, but the technical side of things. I was telling the CAO and CFO and that the meeting here just recently that, you know, we actually have some police body cams in the department now, but we haven't implemented them, and it's not because we don't want to use them. I think they're an excellent tool for a number of reasons, but it's always those tools you bring on that are, you know, high tech and nice to have, and they help with evidence. They're a neutral third party that records the incident and what happened. They help to minimize public complaints, but they also come with a fair bit of work involved in manage them, uploading and holding the data from those things, reviewing them and editing where it's needed, and then the process of adding them to what we're going to or have gone to is the digital evidence management system. That is how that kind of product gets to the Crown Prosecutor's Office. So, you know, all of a sudden there's all these additional administrative functions that are required to implement a body cam for an officer, and that's, you know, I would say that's some reason why we haven't gone to dash cams for the police cars too, which from my previous experience in the RCMP, they've been fantastic tools for the same reasons as the body cams would be fantastic. But if you don't have the infrastructure and the staff to manage those things, you just can't do it. It creates more problems than it fixes. There's been no ability for succession planning. So there's some staff at the department, and they're excellent staff, but they've been in key roles in the department for 20 or 30 years, some of them. At some point, they should have earned the luxury of retiring as well. The unfortunate thing is they have so much corporate knowledge. They have the keys and the only set of keys to a number of different functions and faculties at the department that if they were to leave tomorrow, we would be in very dire straits. We don't have anybody who's been cross-trained on a number of these things, just because the people that are there are so fully tasked with doing their own job that they can't cross-train. Secondly, they wouldn't be in a position to take over the second job because of their already full plate on items. So we're really looking at where we need to have that succession planning, the cross-training, and that risk mitigation around what happens if this person retires. And again, there's people that could retire tomorrow. They have enough service, you know. Hopefully they're not going to retire tomorrow. They haven't given me any indication, but so the requests for this year's budget, we were asking for 2 additional officers and 2 additional constables, to be clear. Again, we're willing to consider staggered start dates for those to lessen the budget impact on this year's budget. 1 additional full-time dispatch position to cover, improve coverage, and scheduling. We can do more efficient scheduling. It ensures that we can get leave and training opportunities for those dispatchers that we've hired. 2 additional 0.75 time dispatchers who will cross-train some of the functions that I mentioned earlier. That gives us that admin support, cross-training, support succession planning. It gives admin support to the officers for some of those functions involved with disclosure and managing the admin side of their work, thereby keeping them out on the road and available for calls. And it adds to retention for everybody. You know, one of the things now, we have casual dispatchers. People that are hired in those positions have to do 6 weeks of training, and it's 6 weeks of full-time and fairly intense training. They can't have another job when they do that. So basically, to accept employment as a casual dispatcher with the Nelson Police, they have to quit whatever job they have. The unfortunate thing is then, though, when they're done their training, they go back to casual status. So there's no guaranteed hours for them. We don't always know when we're going to call them in. We try to schedule them for shifts that we can, or for holidays and things like that. But unfortunately, a lot of the year, they're basically expected to wait by the phone and not have another job. You know, they can't live like that, and we can't ask people to do that. We run into issues because we call them, and of course they do have another job, and lots of times we call on short notice and they're not available. So what ultimately ends up happening is we bring in another full-time dispatcher to cover on overtime. So I don't know if Chris at some point today or probably later will talk a little bit more detail about this and just provide you with the numbers, but with some of the ability with hiring the current ask as far as dispatchers, the full-time and the 2.75 times, is we can adjust the schedule people more efficiently, get rid of some of the overhead around the EDOs or earned days off, which we still then have to staff with somebody. We get rid of the casual dispatchers and have committed employees that are available when we need shift coverage, eliminating a lot of the overtime. And as it sits right now, and Chris, if you can remind me the number, but by doing those changes, we shaved over $100,000 off of the existing costs. And then, of course, there's additional costs with adding new people on, but the net costs for 3 new employees ends up being about $60,000. So again, it's definitely an increase, but I think when you look at all the benefits you get with it, it's an insignificant increase. And now we struggle as well with getting dispatchers proper training and holiday time, and their requests for time off, and then of course they have sick leave in that too. That's unplanned that we're scrambling always to cover for. So I think the significant gains for a relatively small increase in that area is well worth it. We've built in cost savings by, again, eliminating the dispatchers, the casual dispatchers. And as I mentioned, that lets us do the scheduling and overtimes, and it satisfies the proper succession planning. So succession planning, again, they'll be trained as dispatchers, so they could always move into that role. But with those full-time hours now, we can start training them in roles like the court liaison officer, who we have 1 person, and that's probably become a 1.5 person job as it is without all of these other benefits. They're managing significant workload as far as disclosure to the courts. They have to be experts in not only the police department's records management systems, but the court's records management systems, and be able to go on there, transfer all of these court packages, transfer documents, enter warrants onto CPIC, manage the requests from the court and the requests from the Crown that continue to come in as investigations develop or as matters get closer to trial. So right now, I would say we have a very poor system in place where when that court liaison officer is off work and we get urgent requests from the Crown or urgent people are released with conditions and things like that need to be entered into the system, so that if that person is stopped or checked by any police officer anywhere in Canada, that information should be readily available. And right now we manage the bare minimum of with people filling in for her that don't have the training or the expertise in the vast majority of those systems. We're trying to get some capacity, but again, definitely having some people that are designated almost in a role more as an admin support and a backup dispatcher. Again, we achieve 2 or 3 things with those 2 extra positions. The last ask we have is for the CSO, so the Community Safety Officer. I've received some compliments back from people in this room that have seen her at many of the events, but I would say the feedback from the public has been overwhelming as far as her involvement in the community, a number of events she's attended, a number of initiatives that she's put on. We're being asked already for next year, can she do this? And next year, can she run, like the Youth Academy for one, can she run 2 or 3 of those? Because the feedback was so positive from the youth that were part of that. So last slide, the budget impact. I fully recognize that there's an impact to the budget, and it is a bit, I don't know if I would say shocking, but maybe to some people it's a bit shocking. But as I've said the last couple of years, I think the department has been significantly understaffed for the last 10 years, and there was limited increase for probably the first 5 of those last 10 years, and I truly believe since my arrival, it's been trying to catch up with the understanding that you couldn't catch everything up in 1 year, because that would be a significant impact to the budget and probably, very hard for the citizens and the businesses in the town to swallow. But I do think that, we're getting close to being at where I said we should have been at in 2022. So, I still think there's an argument for, even 1 or 2 more today. But, I feel happy that we're getting close to reaching that number that we have been striving for. Staggering officers and support staff from, from the deployment or hiring, I guess, in the year does have some effect on lessening the budget. The only comment I would just like to make here on that is it does bite us the next year a little bit, because if we have somebody start, say, April 1st, so we pay 75% of their salary this year, and then we have somebody start, October 1st, we only pay 25% of their salary this year, but next year it's 100% of both their salaries, or a 25 and a 75% increase in salary. So, I did just want to point out that by doing that, sometimes the next year all of a sudden it looks like we've increased the budget by 1 full person without getting anybody new. So, I know that's happening to us a bit this year too, with, we have a bit of a budget increase without adding anything before we even start. So the Nelson Police Department's request results in an additional 7.9% increase to the existing budget. These numbers were provided by Chris, the CFO, so I know we've been tweaking things and something, so they may change slightly, but as it stands, that worked out to $161.25 annually on the property taxes more or less per household, and then reciprocal amount for businesses. But again, that works out to $13.44 a month increase. I can't speak for everybody in the community, or even I couldn't say even a large majority of the community, but certainly people I've spoken with and the businesses at the chamber meeting we had certainly felt that they were more than willing to have an increase of $13 or $14 a month to certainly see the police department sustainable and having the officers not only coming to work, but being able to get out of the office and be on the street more. So that is it for me. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Chris, can you just tell me the number when they did this calculation? Is this on the $670,000 house that we have in Nelson, or is this on the $500,000 house that for some reason the RDCK that still likes to use?
Yeah, no, I used that typical home that we were referencing for Nelson.
So that's a $670,000 home?
I believe so. I think that's what it was in
Okay, and that's what we're using for all of our budget presentations.
Yep.
Okay, so we're using the same number across
Budget
that.
versus tax impact.
the percentages. Yeah, so there's when we talk about, there's 2 numbers, we can put out there what's the percentage change in the budget, and then there's also that percentage impact on taxation. So I think both those numbers are in the budget that's laid out there, just so it's clear that the number that we were talking about here of that 7.92% is the taxation impact of the police budget.
Okay, I've got Woodward, Lockenberg, and then Payne, I believe. I saw her hand go up. Did I see your hand go up? No.
I'll just
So,
keep it
Lockwood-
there just in case
Woodward-
something comes up.
Lockenberg.
No, I do have a question, yeah. Put me in, Coach.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much to the board for this work. So I guess my feeling is sitting here and having this kind of detailed conversation laid out, it makes a lot of sense. My concern is, how do we deliver this to the public in a way that is understandable too, rather than just all of a sudden this large increase comes. And I'm just wondering, how do we get ahead of this as a city and talk to our community about what's happening here? Because I know, what I hear out there is that, people are they're up against the wall. It's extremely expensive. People are challenged to keep going and pay the bills. So I just was wondering about, you know, what kind of communications can we, how do we deliver this message properly?
I would say you need to see what your whole budget is, and because there's more than one story here. There'll
Yes.
be multiple stories of what those budget impacts are. We're starting with a 6% tax increase before anything, before any additions anywhere. So there's a much bigger picture, but as far as, you know, I think the information the chief has provided is, you know, the foundations of what that message is around policing. But you're going to have multiple, you know, people don't look at just one component of it. They're going to look at that entire tax increase that you're going to provide, and, you know, will, you know, ultimately you have to go through your budget process, and, you know, I think sharing, you know, this is a public meeting, and I think there's great information here that the public needs to understand, and on how staff, you know, how they staff. And I think part of the job of the police board is, you know, what's the outcome if counts, you know, if this is the budget, what do they see on the street? What do they see different out there? Ultimately, I think is what the public wants to see, is that if we're going to have these increases, you know, what am I going to see different on the street? Why is that good value? And that's any service we provide, right?
And I just want to add, and I think we're getting, you know, increasingly better at it, is breaking that out for people, and not just, and we did that with the water and wastewater and resource recovery, and it's sort of taking it apart and saying, you know, it's not just one number. Here's the different components, and this is why this is important. This is why we did that with water and wastewater. It said, you know, we've got these large capital projects coming up, and so we need a certain amount just to cover operating inflationary increases, but we also want to invest this in our future infrastructure so that we're able to take on these projects, and that's a separate component. So just being clear and transparent about where the money is going and why can sometimes help a bit.
So I think, as a supplemental, Mayor? Yes. So I think that maybe what would be really important is we're tasking our communication staff member to really start thinking about, you know, infographics, or really like understandable ways, so that people don't just see that flash of a fairly large increase. So there's an understanding there, because, you know, it's already a lot of tension, I feel like, because affordability is a incredible challenge across the spectrum for lots and lots of people. So I would just make sure that if, you know, starting really early, we get our communications department really moving towards bite-sized, understandable, visual ways of describing what's happening. So, thank you.
Councillor Lockwood.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that presentation, and thanks to the police board for all your work as volunteers doing this. It's really appreciated. So I have a comment that may lead to a question. We'll see as I get through it. So I've been thinking a lot recently about, you know, now that we're in budget season, how do we weigh large disparate parts of our budget against each other to come out with some sort of optimal budget that delivers on sort of an overriding goal or value for the community. And the value that I've come to, that at this point in time we're trying to optimize for, is resilience. My council's heard me talk about this more recently quite a bit. And that lens of resilience really has changed my own thinking as I weigh these decisions, these budget decisions. And relevant to you and your budget, here's how it might affect how I personally would weigh whether we go with 2 additional police officers and a CSO or not, or some balance thereof. So the first is the crime statistics. Now, if we just use that as our driving metric, and that's kind of our decision metric that we're going to use to determine value of the investment of balancing against the other investments we have to make. So crime looks like it's going up. If we make this investment, it'll level off or come down, and that's a good thing. Full stop. But I question if that's actually what a good thing necessarily. On the surface of it seems to be so. But here's how we could be missing the point. As a person, if somebody steals something from me, they break into my car and steal my phone or something like that, there's an effect that it has on me that, depending on my station or position in life, where I'm at, I might be able to breeze it off and be like, oh well, I lost my phone, my wallet, whatever. I'll just adapt, and 2 or 3 days I'll be back on my feet again with my cards. Like, no big deal. Or it could just totally devastate me emotionally or psychologically. It's akin to a violent crime because of the impact that it's had on my life. And I think that kind of metaphor scales up to the community as well. So you have crime running through the neighborhood. The neighborhood can kind of absorb that shock and like, wow, we had a bike stolen in the neighborhood. And, oh well, it happens. It's part of living in a modern society. There are people that are really struggling in life and they're stealing bikes. And, we adapt. It's not a big deal. It sucks, but it's not a big deal. Versus another neighborhood where that happens and the whole neighborhood is like loses a sense of trust or safety. And then that shows up in all sorts of other, qualities of the culture that's emergent in that neighborhood. And so with that kind of lens of like, what is the signal we're trying to do? Because if crime could go up and for example, thefts on Baker Street, or other things, and it actually, the business owners kind of absorb it, they adapt, they build their internal capacity to, set up a security camera, and they just deal with it and in fact grow stronger because of it. And then over 3 or 4 years, you start to see the effect of that as crime starts to drop because they've built up their own internal capacity to respond. As opposed to us kind of taking a top-down approach saying, we're optimizing for crime, crime's going up, throw more resources at it to bring that number down. All of this being said, I think my comment is I would support 2 additional officers and a CSO. In fact, that's kind of where I'm leaning to, which is kind of different from where I was even a couple of weeks ago. If what we start to think about, both internally as a police department, as a city, and then our effect and impact on the community at large, is really about increasing our whole community resilience to shocks, to impacts, to crime, to wildfire, to everything. If on a neighborhood level, individual level, and then on a business community level, these various intersecting communities, we're just increasing our capacity to deal with hard things. And there are things we can do, the police department can do, the CSO can do, you and your interactions with the public can do, that really do increase that social capacity to respond, basically to be more resilient. Then I think it's a good investment because the payoff, and not that I like to use an economic lens on all of this stuff, but the social payoff, the capacity, resilience payoff can be quite significant and will then show up in all sorts of other ways. So that's my comment, basically. To you as a police department, to the police board, to us, let's really think about how, if we're going to be adding additional police officers, how are we going to use this opportunity, these new police officers, and especially the CSO, to really invest in neighborhood resilience, in how we interact with the public in such a way that we don't, oh, well, you got your phone stolen. That really sucks. We're going to do what we can to help you. But you know what? Really, it'll take a couple of days and you'll be back on your feet. No problem. And that kind of thing where responsibility doesn't always come top down. Everybody's got a role to play. The Nelson Neighbor Network, or whatever they're called, are a part of that. For example, these emergent community groups and characters are not somebody we're like, oh, you're annoying, or what you're doing is a hassle, but continue to work and build with those people our overall capacity to respond. So long-winded, I know, but but that's I just wanted to really stress this because this has been my struggle with thinking about this big increase in the police budget.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying. And that's really should be a goal of the department and the community as a whole, is to build that resilience, but also build that ability to, through environmental design programs and different things, to try and minimize crime. I will say, just in speaking about the impact and resilience, I found this year in particular, the victims of the property crime are having that impact as far as psychological, emotional impact on their well-being. We've started sending our victim services units more than we've ever had before to victims of property crime because of that impact. So, I can say for sure that there is an impact, and I sometimes think it gets dismissed a bit. Well, it's only property crime, and this property can be replaced, or but people feel violated, especially if it's in their residence. But again, that's been brought up by several business owners that have had their places broken into. That's just, they feel like they've been personally invaded. So we continue to look at other things, and I know this is maybe not exactly where you were going. Councillor Woodward had brought this up in the past about looking at more camera systems around the community, and I know there's issues and considerations about that as well, but I have seen some demonstrations by various companies obviously trying to get business, but there's some remarkable advantages and features with CCTV footage in public areas, and systems now that can do an amazing, with AI and stuff, an amazing amount of work at identifying people, tracking them through multiple camera systems and stuff that just bring that efficiency up in the police being able to locate or identify the people, prosecute them in court, retrieve stolen property, and then the deterrent effect of that. So again, it's not the end all be all, and I know some people have issues with there being a police state and too many cameras around, but I also see it's something that should really be considered. And again, there's a cost to the system, and there's also a cost to people that need to manage the system. So it's not free, but I would say that it would be a more efficient system, and potentially a more efficient system with better outcomes in the long run.
Can I just speak to that, Councillor Lautenberg? I think you make a very valid point in regards to, it is building our community towards a community policing model. And that's where we struggle with the lack of resources. We have to have a community policing model. This is where the resources are required. What you're seeing right now in the last year with the community safety officer is that community policing model. The ability to build through the youth and getting engagement with the business. This is where we require resources. When the officers are in the station working on disclosure and working on files, they don't have the ability to go out there. It's reactive policing we're doing. We need the resources in order to cover that. So that's why the ask is so large. It's about building that and building collaboration with the community and building that public trust. And that's how we're going to build it. It's through resources. And you're seeing a little bit of it now with the community safety officer, and you'll probably see a lot more next year.
Right, thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Payne, unless you want to take a pass.
No, I got it now.
Okay, there you go.
Got
And
it all
then-
here.
Then Tate, and then Pinero.
Thanks very much. You kind of answered my question there, and I think it jumps off
Sorry.
of. Oh,
Whatever.
did you point at
She
me?
wasn't taking a pass.
Oh, I thought you said I got it all now.
No.
Oh,
I
okay.
have
She's
everything
got- no,
lined
she's
up and
going
ready to
to
go.
lots now.
Okay,
and
go.
then,
Oh, we've got
and then,
lots
and
now.
then you, and then.
I thought you said you've got it all now.
I have a question, a comment, and a request. I think they're brief, but I'll let you be the judge of that. I'm very interested in what percentage of time is normally spent on training. And just under that is sort of, is there an industry standard? And I do understand you have a junior force. The industry that I came from, the standard was 10% of the time I was designated to be in training. So I'm just trying to understand what that number looks like. Is there something specific? And that gets built into a budget once you...
Number. We don't have an exact number.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
there are adequacies.
I was sorry.
Go ahead.
We didn't rehearse.
That was pretty good, though.
I would say that 10 to 15% is probably fairly accurate, but I'll, again, caveat, as I like to caveat things. That's probably taken up with the mandatory, no leeway type stuff that officers have to do on our, some of it's annually, some of it's every 2 years, some of it's every 3 years. There's that mandatory training to keep current in skills and different things that the province has mandated. It's important enough that you need to maintain that. So, we kind of start off on a bit of a, I don't know, a bit of a back foot, just because we have this mandatory training that we have to do that really doesn't progress anybody in their, the rest of their skills and the rest of their ability to serve the public properly. So I would go, again, we kind of figured this out a bit last year, but I didn't look exactly at the numbers of that again for this presentation. So I'll admit it's a bit of a guesstimate, but really we should be at 20% and possibly even a little bit higher is what we should be allotting for time for members for training and development.
Okay, highly supportive of training. I believe it's an investment, not an expense. So I think that's interesting just to have that framework. My comment is just around the Lapine report, where I was reading back over some of our previous presentations, and it clicked into me this core city phenomena that he speaks about, where the population of our community increases 50% during the day. And in this one, I'm going to channel Councillor Page, who says, is there any funding from the RD that can contribute to our policing model? And I'm assuming the thing is no, but I think it's really interesting to consider if we have all these additional individuals in our community, how does that affect the policing model? And are there other communities out there who experience a similar thing and are able to enhance the budget through some sort of cost sharing? That's sort of more of a comment. And I'll just finish off with my request, and then you can fill in any, I can dream, Janice. I know you've been around the block. I know you hear no. But I am, there's equity involved in this, and this is something that we are constantly talking towards and striving for. My last request would be that when we do the comparators next year, I'd be interested in, I understand comparing to communities of a similar size, but I'd be interested in seeing comparisons to communities with a similar socioeconomic breakdown. Because I think we know that Nelson's, now I'm going to forget the word, we have a higher poverty level. We have our median income is lower than many other communities, and certainly Oak Bay being one of them. We don't even approach what Oak Bay is doing. So that doesn't seem to me like a completely legitimate comparison, because we know where there are pressures of poverty and homelessness. I'm assuming, and I don't know, I guess, I'm assuming that property crime would be higher. So that would just be my request going forward, if we could just look at some communities that are a bit more similar in the demographic makeup.
Sure, if I can comment on a couple of those things, and I'll probably forget some so you can remind me, but we did have a discussion about that for this year's presentation, because I know that came up last year. I believe you asked us that last year. So we weren't purposely ignoring you or not including that, but really we looked at it and determined that it is really apples to oranges, because the problem with comparing us to, say, like Castlegar or Trail is that the municipal departments are structured completely differently than the RCMP. They can operate with less management per se, less staff, because they're not responsible for investigating, say, code of conduct things that we have to investigate internally. There's a number of additional administrative and reporting requirements from the municipal to police departments that the RCMP headquarters takes care of for the RCMP, so the detachments aren't burdened with that. The major crimes and GIS sections and proceeds of crime sections and economic crime sections assist all of those detachments with their more serious and complex investigations. They assist them with undercover operators and projects through CFSEU, through their drug teams, through everything else. So they have a lot of extra resources in the background that you don't see. They have a lot less workload, especially on the, I guess, managing and running a department that they're not required to do at the local level. If you look at Oak Bay and Central Saanich as well, and I'm very happy you asked me this because I forgot to include it. So if you look at their budget and what they've had going back a couple of years ago for departments of similar size, they have, and Raj had these numbers, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but about a $1.5 to $2 million more in their budget for a same size department. You might ask why, and especially not being as busy, but they have the ability, being co-located with larger departments, to have those additional support units and resources available to them as needed, but they pay for those. So, you know, that it's sort of invisible from the outside looking at those departments that, well, they've only got 23 officers too, and they seem to be managing, but they've got $1.5 million more in their budget because they have 12 or 15 additional resources that they're paying part for and sharing with some of those municipalities that can come in and assist, and they do come in and assist quite regularly on some of their bigger and more complex files. So they have that extra workload, even though that's crimes and files that are attributed to that department. They're not carrying that workload.
So, yes, you're next.
Great. I'm going to leave my previous question and jump off of that. It sounded like, and I don't know if it was intentional, it sounded like an RCMP model is a more efficient and economic model for a small municipality. It sounded like you said that because they've got these bigger federal programs and departments in place that makes it more cost effective.
I would agree it's definitely more cost effective. You know, there's again, good and bad. And I don't think I would sit here and say, don't consider the RCMP, that, you know, we're head and shoulders above them, or you know, we can do what they can't do. But I think there is still, with the cost, but again, I realize that has to always be, and should be a consideration, that municipal departments still has the ability to, I guess, flex and direct attention or focus based on the municipality's needs, where I know when I was in the RCMP, a lot of the complaints of the community, and in particular city council, was that, you know, there is a lot of the priorities and focus directed by the provincial government and the federal government. So again, there's pluses and minuses to both, and I think that, you know, if that's something that the council wants to discuss, it warrants a separate discussion, just because, you know, I have additional information, but we could spend 2 or 3 hours talking about that quite easily.
No, it's just interesting. I'd never heard it presented that way, but supplemental, to go back to my previous, yeah, Oak Bay. I mean, Oak Bay is not Nelson. Like, it's just, it doesn't matter if it's the same size police force or the same population. It's not the same. We all know it isn't. Kenora, on the other hand, my favorite sister city, they, when you look at the crime severity index, we're at like half of Kenora, Nelson is, and we're still below the national average. So, and I don't know if it's a trend up, like you said, with the COVID, there's like some bumps in the graph. So it's hard to tell if we're trending up or if we're stabilizing in our crime rate or whatever. But I like that at the end of all of those quasi-scary numbers that you reminded us that it's actually quite a safe community. And I think the statistics nationally agree with that. And then I think further to Kevin's comment about what does the community see on the ground with the increased taxation, I think that Raj answered that by saying, you know, you get those resources and you start to build. And I forget about the reactive part to policing, and it's just everything that we do at this table. Like, we have to react to the big fires, but we really need to plan for the long-term health and that can be hard to see when you've got a business on Baker and you're dealing with property crime, or you're dealing with disruptive behaviors, or you're a downtown resident and you're really getting agitated constantly. Like it's really challenging to not just try to chuck a bunch of fire hose at those blasts. But I appreciate you thinking long term that way about responding and planning. So it's a tough one. But overall, a safe community, even compared nationally. Thank you.
Can I just wanted to add one other thing that I, kind of in line with that, but also back to Councillor Payne's question, the one thing I did forget to mention is just, again, we talk about where the resources are drawn and probably answers Councillor Lockenberg's question a bit as well. I think part of the initiative of the city with the police department is to, I guess, right-size some of the services and the expectations on some of those services that we're dealing with their issues. That causes us a significant number of man-hours and time tied up dealing with issues that aren't really the police's to deal with. We've mentioned this in past presentations where I think some of the social services and some of those assistance agencies for people who are in distress or in need are not there when they need to be. They're not there in the size and responsiveness that they need to be. I think that's where the province, and I know the mayor and I have talked about that sometimes, where it's an uphill battle to get the province to have the funding and the resources available. And I sympathize that they're probably struggling with similar resource shortages and that. But ultimately, when the problem is there, people call the police and they expect the police to come and deal with it. I hate to even say this, but of late, our front public counter is becoming a hostel because people have nowhere else to go and the police have nowhere else to take them. They're not criminals. We have no authority to arrest them, even if it's out of good intention to arrest them to give them a warm and safe place to sleep for the night. So they've been showing up and they've been allowed to sleep at the front counter overnight and sometimes into the morning. The downfall is, though, now we have public coming to the front counter for services and they're scared to come into the police department. Like, it's getting ridiculous. I don't want to call out Interior Health, but I am going to call out Interior Health that they need to get some capacity in the hospital to deal with problem people or people that we bring there in distress and mental health or addictions problems. We continue to have 1 or 2 officers there for hours, and I mean hours, babysitting people that could be seen, could be dealt with. They have a seclusion room there to hold people who are not safe to be letting roam free in the hospital, but oftentimes refuse to use it because it's viewed as, throwing people in the dungeon. Well, you have a seclusion room for a reason. It's a safe space, it's got a mattress, but instead of putting them in there, it's better to have 2 police officers sitting in the hospital for 3 to 5 hours, where we're then required to call on our limited workforce that we can't find to cover basic shifts now to come in on overtime to respond to the calls that continue in the community. So, I realize that probably a significant portion of our workload could be shaved off if the people who should be responsible for some of the problems were actually dealing with the problems. And that goes back to the justice system and the revolving door of letting people out on bail when we've asked for them to be held who have committed, we have 2 people that, to my knowledge, are still walking around the community that have resulted in 500 calls for service over the past 3 years for us. If you could have successfully deal with 2 to maybe 5 people in the community, our calls for service would go down significantly. But the police don't have the capacity or the ability or the expertise or the resources to deal with those issues.
Sorry, I don't understand that. Like, as an elected member of government, I do not understand how we fix that. That's provincial, that's judicial, that's whatever, but people are looking at us and they're Facebooking us and they're emailing us and they're like, this is a problem. And I'm like, Yes, it is. I don't know who to ask. I don't know how do we fix that? We've got municipalities struggling under the weight of it. We've got neighborhoods struggling. We've got businesses struggling. And now even our police force are struggling. Like, these are the guys that we look to, and gals and everybody. I don't understand how we fix it. Who do we ask? Do we call the Minister of Public Safety? I mean it honestly, and I don't know if we can brainstorm, but it's in the air. It's so electric.
We do those things. We talked to our MLC, we talked to our MP, we talked to the minister, we've talked to the Attorney General. We will continue to talk. We will continue to advocate. We talk on the local level to Interior Health. As you know, and like I've heard you say it in the council chambers, this is not a Nelson-centric problem. This is a pan-Canadian problem. And we keep advocating. I don't think if you even had an unlimited amount of resources to throw at it, that money is necessarily the solve. It's a structural, systemic issue that took us a number of years to get here, and is going to take us quite a long time to unwind going forward. I wish there was a solution.
Well, Mayor, the province is working on this prolific offender
Yes, and we've asked
issue.
for them to, like, not they during the violent one,
Yeah.
and they're not doing that great a job. I just got
On
another
the
article
property.
that was in the
Yeah.
financial, an excellent article that was in the Financial Post, and we just saw, again, stabbings, random stabbings, all of these random stranger attack stabbings have all been done by people. The person that was doing the stabbing have all, nobody's a new unknown entity to the Vancouver Police Department in Vancouver. They are all offenders, and in some cases, they are getting let out on probation, and within 2 hours are committing another crime. So, the judicial system has definitely got some significant problems, and it's the lack of places where perhaps these people need to go because they obviously have serious mental health problems that, again, we're lacking all of that resource, right? So I wish it was easier. It would be great if this council solved this problem. We'd be so famous.
Like, what do we do?
We would be so famous, but we have to sort of eat the elephant one piece at a time. Perhaps it might be this increase the budget. We've got this information now in front of us. We've kind of heard the plan. I want to make sure that Councillor Pinero gets to speak, because we were also going to hear a little bit about the CSO, and I know that time is ticking on. It's already 2:08, and you guys were the 12:30 to 1:30. But again, it's one of these things where these are important conversations to have, and we do have some bylaws that we have to pass today. But maybe we'll have a break after this, and maybe there's some budget discussions that we can put off. We have a myriad of budget discussion days coming up in the new year, so we'll have a little chit chat about that. But Councillor Pinero.
Some of these points have been spoken to, but I'll just reiterate them a little bit. So regarding like resiliency and people's perception of life here and how safe it is or what have you. And, the difference between somebody being violently assaulted and somebody having their business broken into might be obvious from an outside perspective, but to them might feel the same. I think, though, that we can, to that point, I think we try and we should continue to try to sort of help people with the difference, because there is a difference. I think we do live in a very safe community. I've lived here most of my life, and I've also lived in places that are not safe at all, and the difference is major. Statistically, we always start these meetings with the statistics, and I understand the meaning behind them, and the point is that you are busy, and I don't think anybody's trying to dispute that you're busy. But, if you have one violent assault a year, and then next year we have 2, that's 100% increase in violent crime. So it doesn't mean that I'm any really more at risk of being violently assaulted, to be honest. So I think the meaning that people infer from these statistics can be a little bit like alarmist in some ways, and I think part of our job as a city and your job as a police force is to sort of give people the reality of that as well. Like, yes, crime is up 50%, and yes, you're still good to walk home with $100 bills hanging out of your pockets and nothing's going to happen to you. Statistically speaking, it'll be fine. I've done it, you know. The other thing,
Really?
it's just a very safe place. It is. And then the crime that does exist, I'm not downplaying it, because being broken into isn't great. And the one thing that you've said that I think does ring true, and many things ring true, but one of the things that stood out for me is the repeat offenders, and the fact that, like, you know, I've spoken with somebody, you know, close to me across the street where I live, whose business was broken into recently, and they know who it is, you know who it is, everybody knows who it is, and it's the same guy that broke into another place like a month ago. I don't know that a surveillance camera helps with. We already know this is a very small town. There's 5 people or whatever, and that's the crime in the town. So I'm not sure that, you know, drones or robot policemen or anything like that is going to help with that, really. And the downside, I think, is, you know, there's a serious risk of overreach in those situations. But given that, you know, it is sort of 3 people doing all of these things, and you've sort of spoken to the problems there, the processes and the issues around, you know, processing these people and making sure that they don't do it again, kind of thing. Those exist and are sort of seem very far out of our control. So how can the police, like, how does 2 extra officers help with that? And, you know, we've identified that there's an issue with, there's mental health, there's economic desperation, there's just this total lack of social cohesion and this, like, social isolation that people are feeling that allow them to do these things. And none of that seems to be the purview of the police. Whether or not you're dealing with it or not, I don't know that, you know, more police, does that help you deal with it when it's not something that you can really deal with in the first place? Do you understand what I mean? I think, you know, at some point, we can advocate for more police, but we could also advocate for better mental health services and potentially, you know, more help on those other ends that aren't really police issues. And then we potentially have, like you said, less police work, because that work you're being asked to do isn't really police work so much of the time. And the results of that sort of deficit in other areas is that you actually do get police work. That is real police work, like break-and-enters and assaults and whatnot. So I'm curious to see how you envision sort of more staff helping with that public perception of safety, because it is a bit of a public perception of safety at some point, because this isn't, you know, certainly like where my family's from, I used to run from the bus stop to get home, because if you walked, you'd get mugged. Like, that's not the case here. So you know, it is a public perception, but how does that extra staffing help with that perception? And how do you feel that it's going to help with things like, you know, the same guy that robs 4 Baker Street businesses in a year, you know, how does that help process him when none of those things are really in our control anyway?
I think there's, I'll try and answer a number of things you brought up. One, I agree with you, and I continue to say that I still think it's a very safe community, but it is slowly eking away at becoming less safe. And again, I feel like we don't want to necessarily wait until it is an unsafe community before we start doing anything about it. So I do think the extra officers, the perception, simply the availability of police to come and respond to things gives that perception of it being safe, but also acts as a deterrent. You know, we've had 3 or 4 incidents over a short period of time where there was, violent people downtown, causing significant issues to businesses. One time it was 2 incidents occurring at the same time. And it was a weeknight, so there was 2 police officers down trying to deal with the violent person outside of Broken Hill. Whether it was opportunistic or what, but then somebody else started causing very similar problems in a business 2 or 3 down trying to pick fights with people and being disruptive, and they called the police, and the response was, well, all the police that are working are already down there dealing with the first problem. So, there is certainly times where there is serious crime happening or potential for violence to happen that we want to have the ability to respond to as timely as possible and prevent that violence from happening, or unfortunately, if it does happen, be there in time to deal with it and catch the offender shortly after the offense, do the proper investigations rather than just running from call to call. In regards to the issues that we're dealing with now, as the deputy has said numerous times in previous presentations, we're always in reactive mode. There is certainly enough police work in the community to keep the police busy, even at the numbers that I'm asking for. The problem right now is we cannot focus on any of the proactive activities. We continue to gather intelligence on other criminal activity that occurs, drug activity, various, crimes that certainly could be looked at under the Proceeds of Crime Act and things like that. But that takes time, and that takes sustained focus and project-style investigations that we just don't do here. And we don't have, resources that we can bring in to assist with those types of special investigations, at least not on a regular basis. There are some provincial resources that we have looked into having come to the community and doing a focused project for us. But as you can imagine, they're half the communities in the province are on waiting lists for those, again, very finite resources to do those types of investigations. And to your point, some of the communities certainly have a higher need for them, and they also bring the violent crime with them. So luckily we're not a priority, but unfortunately we're not a priority, so we don't get those resources. So I think I'm giving you a long answer to the question, but
long question.
We certainly could keep ourselves busy, and with with those resources, and in a perfect world, more resources, we certainly wouldn't be short of work. But I would like to see the police work be focused on actual police work, as opposed to the large percentage of our time that is focused on sort of doing the Band-Aid solution and dealing with issues in the short term with no real solution, and those become just repetitive issues as well that tie up our resources. So, if I thought it would make a big difference, I'd be happy to see some of our, I don't know, funding is the right word, because I don't think the city should be paying for some of the things that would fix the problem, but, I would gladly like to see those other agencies get the funding to deal with some of the problems that police are currently the last resort to deal with.
I just wanted to, can I just supplement there? Yeah. Councilor Paneri, you made some valid points. I think the issue in regards to boots on the ground approach is the collection of evidence. When we have persons that we identified, it's just not the police being able to identify them or the citizens being able to identify them, it's the ability to prosecute them. And it's going to require us to collect that evidence. So that's very important for us in regards to that aspect. When we look at this and we look at, us being responsible for these 2 individuals that have caused 500 incidences for us over the last 3 years, we look at the data, it's obviously a social disorder issue. Housing first. We don't have housing for them, so who calls? They call us. There's a person that's vagrant, we require to attend there, we move them along, they go somewhere else and they create another issue in regards to a criminal call. Then we attend again. So I think it has to be a collaborative approach. Allowing us to have boots on the ground with another member allows us to identify this, bring it to a table, and have a discussion with other social stakeholder partners that can assist us in finding housing, finding discipline, or finding disability money to kind of have this person find the appropriate resources to get off and get in an area where they can help themselves. I think there's three things that we need to know: that there has to be the opportunity, there has to be an offender, and there has to be a victim in most criminal elements of things. So when we have one of those things, it kind of increases it. So more boots on the ground allows us to be more proactive in our policing tactics. It allows us to have resources, they use provincial resources to target individuals that are continuously doing this and gather the evidence that requires us to prosecute them.
And I would say often we're gathering the evidence, if you want to call it that, or the support for those people who maybe aren't necessarily committing criminal offenses but are causing issues, and we need to still gather that information and supporting evidence to take to the other agencies to say, this person is a priority in need of help. So I think we do that quite regularly, but again, we could do a better job of that, thus building that resiliency through helping the people that need help in the community and successfully passing that information on as to why they're a priority for help to the agencies that can help them.
Supplemental, Councillor Pinero, and then I'm going to entertain Councillor Lockenberg for one last comment, and then I'm going to ask for us to be able to.
So just that being said, that there's obviously a gradient between like people who, you are getting calls for service from people that aren't committing crimes. But they might, or they could, or they have, or something like that. There needs to be, given the gradation of offenses, basically, there needs to be some sort of like lower gradient of response as well. I'm wondering how effective street outreach is at that, in that capacity, and would maybe another street outreach worker be an effective, if we're talking about more resources on in a broad spectrum. So coupling that with, another police officer or something, as opposed to just putting all of our eggs in the police basket. Like, there's obviously police work and there's obviously social work, and the two are very much combined at the moment. So we either like ignore that and just keep going, or we do something about it where we can like integrate, there's some sort of conversation between the two. And I know that there is already. I'm just saying maybe there are like more resources to other agencies. And I just mentioned street outreach because it's something that we actually have some control over. No?
Oh,
No.
that's a social service agency. But I mean, we have asked for more money. We've looked at getting silver forfeiture to look at that. So we've advocated for more.
We can advocate for
Yeah,
more money for that, whereas like, it's a much clunkier advocacy for other branches of government or what have you, right? So, in your view, is that relationship working? And does it complement what you're doing? I guess is my supplemental question.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep my answer short because I think there is a good relationship. I think it's working to the level that it can work, but I would also say, a lot of the times that we work well together because I think street outreach oftentimes needs the support of the police because, even though, people may not be committing a crime, and I would say a lot of times they are committing a crime technically, but they're minor in nature, and they're not something that we're looking to go there and take enforcement action on, but it's enough that we're being called there, and we do have some authority to remove the person if need be, or take away their alcohol if they're drinking on the street, or ask them to move somewhere else if they're causing a disturbance or harassing people walking by. Again, we have that authority if we need it, but preferably we deal with it through other means, street outreach being one of them. But again, you're dealing with people that have the potential to become violent or aggressive, and sometimes we're still required there just to keep the peace. That's one of our core functions as well, so we support outreach in that. The second piece, and I don't want to speak on behalf of outreach because I don't know exactly what they have for resources all the time and what their abilities are, but I honestly think they would run into the same issue. I mean, they aren't going to provide treatment to somebody. They're sort of that conduit of help getting them to the place where they can get the help they need. So if the help they need isn't there, whether it's the police taking them there or street outreach taking them there, the help isn't there. So, compliments to street outreach, but I think they run into the same issues that police run into.
So to come back to Councillor Tate's question about what we can do about prolific offenders, and apologies if you already know this, there was a study done by the province related to recidivism in Victoria, Williams Lake, Kamloops, 6 pilot cities, where they focused on hiring a new coordinator for this program targeting repeat offenders. So that I'll just quickly read it to you, because the reason why I'm raising this is because it gives us a framework to then advocate to our MLA and then to Minister Sharma, who could facilitate this program here in Nelson. So there's a direct and meaningful ask that can come out of this. So the program it involved targeted and intensive offender surveillance, and then probation partnerships, or something they call prolibation. And the concept here, there's 2 parts to it, sort of intensive surveillance on the prolific offenders. And that involves not just the police, but the coordinated group of partners, including mental health, including businesses in the community. Like, everybody knows who these repeat offenders are, so that when it comes to evidence gathering, I know who that person is, and I would be able to more accurately deliver an eyewitness account because I saw that person walk past my business, and then it kind of creates a stronger evidence trail. So that would be part 1. Part 2 is that working with Crown Counsel to have expedited files on this person. So it's really a 1-2 punch that then gets that offender into treatment is often the outcome for some of these people. And it turns out that program piloted in the UK on the treatment side, but kind of building off of what happened in the US minus the treatment, seems to deliver some pretty effective results on repeat offenders. So what I'm just raising that for us, if this is something that we think is interesting for Nelson, because the pilot was only in 6 larger communities, Williams Lake being maybe the exception, but it might deliver better results here because we're quite a much tighter downtown, quite a tighter community, and so the visibility of these few repeat offenders could probably be better tracked. And if the province is open to it, they could deliver us funding for, as they did for these other communities.
Yeah, and that was my point was to you, is that this is about violent offenders. A lot of the money that's been channeled from the government has a big program on violent offenders, having nighttime court options to make sure they get. What we've asked for and what we asked from here at UBCM is that this program be expanded to non-violent
I get what you're
offenders.
asking. This program was targeted on property offenders, not violent crime. So the province has already invested in a pilot program that apparently delivers pretty successful results on the recidivism and the repeat offenders related to property crime. So if they've done it before and they've got results, it gives us a frame to advocate to the MLA and to the minister for funding for us to try that program.
And we asked for it.
We'll ask again. But I mean, now we have a framework in which to ask. We can basically say, you've done the program, you got these results, let's try it again in a community that's a little tighter, and it might really apply and work for us. I think especially given that our MLA is quite close to, now that she's in cabinet, and she's quite close to the Attorney General as well as to the Minister of Finance, I think we probably have the best shot we've ever had in terms of delivering a really concrete ask to the province for funding. So I just want to lay that out. It gives at least something to do, something to ask for that's not just about more money, more support. That's all.
Okay, so I want to thank you, Chief, for coming in. I wanted to hear I've had the privilege of listening to the CSO report, but it's 2:30, and I'm just trying to gauge. I need some help here from staff in terms of where we're going, because I would say to do that program justice is going to be another half an hour, which would take us to 3:30, or if this is something where we could have the CSO report come to a meeting in the beginning of January, because I think I think it would be great to see what she's done. The board has seen what she's done, and it's really, really exciting work. It's just a different thing altogether, and now she's done this police camp. I got that wrong, didn't I, Raj? My apologies. What was it called? The police
Academy.
youth police camp. Thank you. That was really well received. I'm looking for some suggestion here from. Yeah.
I don't think you don't have to. Our budget process is going on for quite a while still. So.
Yeah, I prepared a very high-level sort of starting point. We weren't going to really dig into it today anyway, and I know these types of conversations and questions, I mean, this is just a reflection of all of the things that you're hearing, so I'm fine with whatever council wants to do. If they want to keep listening or if they want to switch gears, it's up to you.
Can I just, and I'll jump in just for a second too, and I know I let you know, and you know, we can certainly deliver the presentation today if there's time for it, but unfortunately the CSO, we sent her on actually some very valuable public relations and media training in Vancouver that the Vancouver Police Department agreed to take her on. So another great thing for her to be involved in, but unfortunately she's had 3 flights canceled, and the last one being this morning, so she's not here today. So we planned on her doing the presentation. As I said, we could do it, but I think there might be value in letting her do it and hear from her.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Raj, you sort of supervise this program, and you won't be here, but I'm sure that the chief and if some of the members of the board wanted to come in for some backup for her, but I think, and then she could tell us about what she learned at this training as well that she's been away for. So if it's all right with council, I'm going to make the decision that we reschedule having the CSO presentation to early in January. We will try to accommodate that into one of the either the regular meeting or the COW meeting in January, so we don't leave that hanging. And we'll have Silk come and do the presentation, and I think that would be great if everybody has a comfort level with that. Councillor Tate.
Is there an appropriate opportunity to ask if we could, like, I know sometimes we refer to staff on things, and this is probably not the moment, but I would also be interested in that prolific offender intervention, assertive intervention program as an ask. And so I don't know where to say that, but I'm just going to say it now, and you can tell me later where I'm supposed to say that.
You can say that whenever you want, because that would be something that we'd have to investigate, and whether what we look at in terms of our position of what we might go. I think it is a city thing, because it would be us going to the government to ask.
Yes.
If we got it, it would just help policing. It's not going to pay for any more police. It's not going to be a budgetary issue per se. So
thank you.
We can have that. Don't lose that thought.
Mayor, do you need this moved?
Councillor Lockton will remind me.
We can just move receipt of the preliminary budget presentation.
I'll move that, please.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for receipt of the preliminary budget? Seconded by Councillor Tate. All those in favor, and that carries. So thank you. I want to thank the my buddies, the board members back there. Thank you, Jane and Nina and Eric, for sticking it out, and Chief, and once again.
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thanks too, because I find I do, even though it's on the hot seat a bit, enjoy coming here and enjoy the questions, and find the board, council very supportive of the department. So I do want to acknowledge that too.
Okay, everybody, just like a 5-minute break. Finished with the Columbia River Treaty. He'll be back, but we have quorum. So just a little change in the agenda. We're just going to go to bylaws, because it is important that we get these bylaws passed because of the sequence in which we send out billing. So the first bylaw is the fees and charges, water, wastewater, and resource recovery. And so each year the city reviews the long-term operating and capital plan for the water and wastewater utilities, as well as the resource recovery service. This review ensures that rates are set to adequately fund annual operating costs and build capital reserves for current and future infrastructure needs. Council is now requested to pass the first 3 readings of the Fees and Charges Amendment 2025 Water, Wastewater, and Resource Recovery Rates Bylaw number 3625 2025. There's a
I'll move.
Okay. And so you're going to move number 1?
Yep.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Tate. Are there any questions? We had some discussion, final discussion around this on Tuesday at council.
Good.
It's been before us a couple times. Okay, seeing none. Okay, nobody else got up and leave. I didn't realize that Councillor Lockenberg had stepped out of the room. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And that carries. And then we have the second recommendation, moved by Councillor Woodward.
Yep.
Seconded by Councillor Tate. Councillor Woodward, sorry, I didn't get you to read it the first time, so you can read it this
Second
time.
one. The Corporation of St. Nelson, Fees and Charges Amendment 2025, Water, Wastewater, and Resource Recovery Rates, Bylaw number 3625, 2025 be read a third time by title only.
Okay, this has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And we will do the last reading at the business meeting in January. And that gives you enough time for the bills. Okay, so we'll see this come back to the final reading in January, the 7th, I think. Okay, moving on to 10B, the Hydro Service Bylaw Rural Rate Amendment. On September 24th, 2024 and October 25th, 2024, Nelson Hydro presented to council with regards to the 2025 budget and the corresponding need for annual general rate increases from the rural service area. Council provided staff with direction to move forward with implementing a 7.54% annual general rate increase for the rural hydro service area. Hydro Service Bylaw Rural Rates Amendment number 3618 2024 is now presented to council for adoption. And I'm just going to let the city manager, we had referred this to this meeting, and it looks like the information that was received isn't changing our application going forward. So it's back here to do this last reading that we moved from Tuesday to today.
Maybe I'll just clarify that. So as far as we have filed our rate application for the rural area with the BC Utility Commission, they have given interim rate approval, and they've set out the regulatory schedule to consider those rates. And as you're aware, in previous years, things can change between what council passes and ultimately what the BC Utility Commission decides our rates will be for the rural area. The Utility Commission has statutory authority over rates in the rural area. So really, we're putting forward what we believe they should approve, and ultimately they have authority to approve a rate. In the past, they've allowed us to put any difference in a deferral account, and then we recover that in the next year. The one thing that, as I noted on Tuesday night, that had changed was they have now the decision on what was called the general cost of capital review has been completed. They have approved higher return for us. They have approved that's on an after-tax basis, and they've approved a higher interest rates for us. All those things will impact the return the city will receive on its assets that are in the rural area. However, we need to file the evidence of what that looks like to the Utility Commission by January 31st, 2025, and that will, how those changes will be reflected in rates going forward, whether those are applied at some point in time in 2025, whether they're applied retroactively or whether they're applied recovering them in the future will all be determined through that process. So I think we can go ahead and adopt the current rates, and just letting you know that's subject to potential change in 2025 might actually impact future years as opposed to 2025 if they follow what we've done in the past.
Sounds good.
Okay, so there's a recommendation before you, Council. I need a mover, moved by Councillor Woodward, seconded by Councillor Pinero. Councillor Woodward.
That the Corporation of the City of Nelson Hydro Service Bylaw Rural Rate Amendment Number 3618, 2024 be finally adopted.
Great. So we've had a few days of discussion. We've had some information provided again today. All those in favor and those opposed, and that carries. Thank you, Council. So we'll go back to number 9 now, because now we've got all the majority of the business accomplished that needed to be done today. And I will ask Amy, the Deputy Finance Officer, to come forward.
Well, the timing is a bit off, eh?
Yeah, just a
Start at
bit off.
1:30.
So 3 o'clock. So we're going to just start this general overview. I do believe our day was to go to 4, but I know that I've seen the great work of Amy and Chris in the finance department, and in an hour she might be able to get this all pulled off, or say like 58 minutes. Because we are meeting again in January on the 10th.
Yes.
And I believe we have actually additional dates added. I think we're meeting on the 10th, the 17th, and the 24th of January for budget discussions. So this will not be the last time.
Okay.
So over to you, Amy.
Get sick of me.
Don't get sick of me. Never.
And I don't know if CFO Jerry wants to start it off with a nice
Maybe,
introduction.
yeah.
Or?
I just wanted to say, first of all, like, don't ever feel bad for us. You know, that, you know, I know we come in at the end and, you know, folks start to get a little tired, but like this is just a reflection of all of the stuff that you hear and you listen and the great questions you ask and the presentations from the police chief and the library and all those things. So that's the important part. And we're fine to have you absorb all that information before we start throwing sheets of paper at you. So I think Amy's going to kind of talk us through sort of what we thought as a bit of a calendar going forward. We're already a good chunk of the way through this. We've done hydro. You just passed that bylaw moments ago. We've done water, wastewater. We've done resource recovery. Now we're kind of moving on to that general taxation piece. So we've prepared a bit of a calendar that we'll go through, and then a very high level, you know, starting point for budget discussions that we'll kind of walk through a little bit before we get into the, you know, meatier budget sessions in the new year.
Thank you. Lovely.
When is that? What's that final date? Has to be in Victoria.
When do we have to?
May the 15th.
Yes.
May the 15th.
I passed it here.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. It's right there. Sorry, I apologize. Yes. Thank you. May the 15th. Yes. Sorry.
Okay, so if you're looking at the calendar in front of you, we'll touch on a few of the items. The items in green are kind of our budget dates, so there are quite a few in there already. One note is I think currently in your calendar we have February 7th. We're actually going to shift that one just slightly for the public engagement and maybe bump that to the 14th if that works for council. But if we jump back to December, today is the 6th, that's where we are right now. You'll notice the 20th is a little bit different highlighted. We're going to switch up the process just slightly this year. So on the 20th, we're hoping to provide council with kind of a budget package that you'll receive before the holidays. So it won't be tied with a budget meeting per se, but it's something that you'll be able to kind of look over when you've got some downtime on the holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Is it going to be rough?
Yeah, with the...
Yeah.
I look at my stocking like, what the?
So kind of describing that package, because we won't be able to sit down with you and walk through it that day, but it will begin with kind of an outline of what the package is and what you can kind of expect in the next few pages. It will outline kind of the base budget for 2025, and that's all of the inflationary or already committed items. That's a good starting point. And then it will also include a secondary budget that we'll probably call the supplementary budget. So that's including all of the items that we have requests from internal departments for operational needs, as well as any items that came up in previous council meetings that were kind of deferred to a budget talk. For example, the big Sioux oil, or previously on Tuesday, the
Amy, the only caveat for that is we want to be able to have our consultant come present the fire master plan. That won't be till the end of January or February. So we'll just put in a line that, from, the impacts of that review. So we won't quantify what that is at this stage. We don't think it's fair to just throw out a number without context to that. So that's going to be a gap in what you're potentially looking at.
Thanks, Kevin. So for each of those supplementary requests, they'll also include a reference page outlining the purpose or the goal of the request, some budget implications, as well as how it's going to be funded, and any potential impacts that potentially may occur if it's not approved. So we'll give you that kind of holiday time before we meet back on the 10th to review that and think of any questions you may have. If you do have some during that time, feel free to send them over. We won't respond to any of them, but it will provide a lot of information to the departments when we bring them back, and hopefully get the most out of those meetings if we do have a few preloaded questions that we can make sure to answer when we come back. Yeah, and then January we'll bring some departments in on the 10th and the 17th to answer some questions. Then we're hoping to get some feedback from all of you and kind of what that draft budget looks like from this council. And then we'll open it up to the public for their feedback late January, early February, which will then drive our maybe last budget meeting on the 14th to think of some rates.
Wrap it all up with Valentine's Day.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Amy, I did see a request actually cross my desk about the 24th of January. I don't see it on this calendar. We're not adding, we're just sticking with what we've got there.
The 24th of January is going to be a potential one, so we'll kind of play it by ear, see how the 10th and 17th go. If we need to bring back more departments, we will put in a little placeholder in calendars, but it's not a
So just if
guaranteed.
everybody can remember then to put a little placeholder in their calendar for the
I will send out a
24th,
placeholder
or
for you.
shade in the 24th, just ever so lightly on this calendar we've had it handed out.
The other piece that city manager just, further to what he was saying about the fire master plan, if we're getting that information in February, we, will want to potentially incorporate some of that in the information that we send out to the public. So that 2-week period, there will be a 2-week period, but it may not exactly line up with that end of January, beginning of February. It might be shifted a little bit later in order to get that information first, if that makes sense.
Will it be in advance of us coming together for the final budget meeting to have that public information?
Yeah, and we can always, so that one that we have on the 14th, we could shift that out a couple of weeks. So we want to make sure that you get that feedback from the public before you make
That's important.
those decisions. So yeah, we'll just shift everything over if we need to. Any more?
I think that's all I've got,
Oh, okay.
unless anybody has questions. It's hopes and dreams,
Yeah.
kind of like today's timeline.
Counselor Payne?
In the lovely holiday budget package that we get, will we have access to the org charts that were requested about a month ago? Will that be in there for the different departments?
Oh, why not?
Yep.
Get that going.
Yeah, I know you said it was forthcoming. I just didn't know where it fits into this. That would be great. Thank you.
Any other questions that people particularly want to see maybe coming forward into our Christmas surprise package? Counselor Tate?
I had asked for an org chart. That was
That's
what you just said?
Just Counselor Payne just asked for.
Sorry, I misheard you. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay.
We updated on our webpage?
What?
The org chart? I bet it should be on our webpage. Make sure it gets posted there properly.
Okay, if it's, sorry, I don't. go to the website that often. I find it a little
Yeah.
challenging to.
That's great. If it can all be in one spot,
Yep.
it's a lot easier when
That'd
we're
be awesome.
looking at it. I'm a paper person, so there wouldn't be too many chances I'd be turning on the website to look for it, so.
Yeah, and it's just having it there as I'm looking at the numbers, as you say, it's easier.
I just wanted to ask about interest rates, like set by the. I was just hearing on CBC this morning about possible interest rates hikes. I'm just wondering, does that affect?
I think, you sure it wasn't the other way?
Yeah, it might be
Oh, was it
lowering
interest
them.
rate?
Yeah.
Handa was talking about
It
doing
would've been
another.
Oh, lowering. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, there's another meeting in December, so they'll.
Right. Sorry. So what is that? How does that affect us?
Well, we do have investment income that's tied to interest rates, so there'd be that impact. On the flip side, any
Be lower.
Yeah. Yeah, so we would, receive less investment income on those investments that are linked
Short-term.
to floating rate borrowing or floating rate investments, right?
Right.
On the flip side, if we're anticipating any borrowing, then that's a positive because that lowers the interest that we would pay on debt. So yeah, there's a couple different things there. Yeah.
Okay.
And, inflation and
Yep.
equipment costs and all those things, people's borrowing costs are higher than those costs of care and inventory, and all those things get passed on to the, to the purchaser. So we can see interest rate drops. Hopefully that bodes well for the future. Also, pressure on collective agreements, etc. We see inflation drop, and people's mortgages are renewed at not at 5% or 7%, they're renewed at 3%. Then all those things.
So generally,
helpful.
interest rates going down is
a good
generally
thing.
good for us then?
I think that's a positive. Yeah, and
Across
it's
the board?
and
That's a good thing.
like the city manager was saying, for folks that have mortgages, and if they're up for renewal, then that's less money that they'll need to spend on their monthly
Right.
finances each month, right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It's good, but you want to also keep in mind too is that we never, during the last 6 years, been here that long at the table, we've always been very conservative and tight with our money in terms of not, and so I believe that we're still a little bit behind on the fact that when we were trying to put in these rates, these taxation rates that were like 2 and 3%, during a time when inflation was 8%.
That's right.
We're still playing a little bit of catch up on that. And what people always think when they see these lowering rates, that somehow that something spectacular has happened, but 8% got put into the system, 8% still there. What you don't want is 8% year after year, right?
Right.
So people say to me, oh, well, it's come down. And I'm like, yeah, but the loaf of bread still costs whatever it costs now. And if inflation is 2%, that loaf of bread is going to cost 2% more.
Right.
So you don't lose. Like it's interesting how it's delivered. It makes it sound like suddenly we took out an eraser and erased the last 2 years of this sort of hyperinflation, but it's now built into whatever we're buying, paying,
Right.
looking at. There's many benefits for it being lower, but at the same time, we're still paying, as a municipality, as a system, we're still playing a little bit of catch up because of the fact that those prices are now set.
Set at a higher, okay, I understand.
Just a quick question. Sorry, do we have variable rates on our loans? Did you say our payments go down?
Sorry, on investment income.
Yeah,
Not on
that
any
goes
debt.
down.
Yeah.
No, not,
Yeah.
yeah, gotcha.
But we will, if we're gonna incur debt,
Yes,
then yeah.
but it doesn't change our current payments.
Well, what
Yeah.
MFA does.
Well, yeah, you set that for 10 years. So if we have any debt that's coming up for that 10-year mark, because we usually borrow for 20, and they lock it in for 10, and then when you get to that 10th year, they'll lock it in for another 5, that sort of thing. So if we have any debt that's coming up for renewal, to reset the interest rate, then that would impact it.
Gotcha.
So we had a couple of those where the rate actually, because it's been over the last couple of years, was higher than what we had. So debt cost actually goes up. Even though we didn't borrow anything more, they just got renewed at a higher rate.
Gotcha.
So they're trying, like, the interest rate going down is actually trying to speed up the economy, right? Because, is that right? Because if the economy is too hot, then they make it more expensive to spend money.
cheaper to borrow money. They raise interest rates to slow it down. Because it costs you more to do everything.
Right.
So
they're actually trying to
stimulate
the economy.
Taking their foot off the brake a little less.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
But trust me, you're not going to the States anytime soon with a 43
Oh, my gosh.
cent.
No.
That was what my bills have been coming through at from being in Texas last week. 43, 143.
I paid 141 a couple weeks ago, but yeah, it was crazy.
Because we'll get more tourists.
Right, so the American tourists will come here because
We'll
they
spend money in our.
Right. Okay.
Come on down. The hoteliers need it.
Holy, so many moving targets.
Yeah.
Well, there's also
What it's all about, Jesse.
immigration, an overall population decline, a slower growth population.
That's right.
A lot of our economy is powered by that consistent population growth. To keep that, to hit that 2% growth target. So, now with some of the immigration changes and everything, you're going to see a general slowing in our economy just simply as a result of that. So then tack on sort of all the other potential implications, and what appears to be a fairly complex, or at least a situation with a number of variables over the next couple of years.
Okay.
So is there anything more specific that we needed to dive into in terms of these budget discussions, or are we just going to wait till we meet? What time are we meeting on the 20th?
I do have a bit more. Sorry, that was
Okay.
just
I
the
think
first
he's
piece of
just
paper.
sending it to us. We're not meeting on the 20th.
more to come.
You're just,
Are we just sending it to us on the 20th? We're not meeting on the 20th.
It's gonna land.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
This
That's
budget
why it was in
package, we're
a
getting
slightly
That's why it's in
different
light green.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just boom.
Yeah. Dark
So
green
we're
is that
gonna-
we're meeting.
Dark
We're gonna
green
have
is our
sticker
meeting,
shock
okay.
all by ourselves.
Everybody's packing her in here.
Yeah.
Still got 2 more hours.
You guys will
Go
do
ahead.
that.
We got
Next time
quorum.
you're leaving the
Okay,
office.
Amy
still
has
got
another
quorum.
piece of paper, sorry.
We've still got quorum.
We're not done.
Hey, Jesse.
Thank you.
Bad news with a smile.
Well, it does help, a spoonful of sugar and all that.
And everyone says thank you. It's so sweet.
Thank you. Amy. It's so cute. It's so Canadian.
Okay, so what Amy just passed out here there's 2 pages to this. The first one is the general, it says key budget drivers, 2025, general operating fund status quo. So this is a business as usual sort of impact analysis of what are those things that are sort of impacting the bottom line. This is on the presumption that, we don't do anything different next year. We got the same staff. We had police come and present their budget to us. The police board aspect of this would be just, them continuing with the same number of officers. So none of those supplementary items. This is just sort of that base level starting point to give us an indication of where we are if we were to just go forward on a
On a go-forward basis.
go-forward basis. Yes.
So on your
Yes.
go-forward basis, what did you use as your factor? Like, did we look at 2%, 2.5, 3? What did you,
For inflation?
what did you put in there?
So I didn't, and I'll get to that a little bit here, is that I really didn't use any inflation. I went through with the departments line by line. There are certain things that we are, we have insurance, property insurance, or we have software costs, or those types of things that, really don't have a lot of discretion over. And wages is a large component, that's at the top. But those other items that are discretionary, we tried to get the departments to just hold to a 0 this year. So if you're talking about your professional development or travel or office supplies, meals, that type of thing, we're trying to just keep that tight this year, recognizing that it's a challenging year, and we'll try and do what we can with what we've got.
Oh my
goodness.
goodness.
What's going on?
What the?
Yeah.
What?
Someone's coming.
Our new bylaw officer.
Just keep parking claims down.
Nice to see you.
I should know what KLW means.
Treats here, so.
Yeah, the chocolate's in
They're in
behind,
the
just go
next
in
room.
there. Yep.
Maple fudge. Always. I should know what KLW stands for.
So that's Kootenai Lake West, so that's the transit.
Oh, okay,
expansion
gotcha.
that we
Yep,
covered.
yep.
Yeah, let's start at the top.
Just didn't click.
So we had a number of collective agreements that were signed, ratified in this year. So we know what those amounts are, looking backwards as well as going forwards. So, we had QP, we had fire in there. We've got $9.5 million of wages in our general operating budget. So that's the impact of sort of those pieces that are that we're locked into. Go for it. Yep. Oh yeah, sure.
There's a sheet on your desk probably.
Yeah, we're just on that top line of.
I'll catch up.
Yep. Okay.
Look, it's a new bylaw officer.
There are free cookies. Always saving a penny.
Okay, so that's the inflationary.
So, I just want to, again, add a caveat.
Sure.
Both police and fire contract expired June 2025. So there's no provision in this budget for any further increase in 2025. Whether that's achievable, I don't know at this stage. I can tell you that I know at least one fire department settled for quite a larger increase than we gave in 2025 for fires. So that's discouraging.
The second line there, WorkSafe premiums. So I tried to pull out some of those other aspects of wages that aren't directly, attributable to, that take-home pay that, our workers bring home, that it's sort of those overhead type increases, because we've seen some pressures on our overheads as well. So WorkSafe premiums, the impact of that is $140,000 next year. And there's a couple of components of that. So the way the WorkSafe works is they have that, they'll have maybe regular increases to the premium, but there's also an experience component of that, which is based on your last 3 years of claims. So we know sort of what the impact of that is going forward. Our general manager of Nelson Hydro, Scott Spencer, has put together a bit of a business analysis of some options of what we could do to help bring that down and get focused on corporate safety and that type of thing to sort of deal with this. And there are obviously direct benefits of doing that from a financial point of view, trying to get these premiums down, but also just overall general health and welfare of employees. So we'll include that as well in some of this going forward.
So you'll see this in the business case that is brought forward on that health and safety, but I think if I remember the numbers right, like police alone we're paying over $200,000 a year on premiums above what the base rate for WorkSafe is for that employee classification because of the claim experience we've had in police, and we're about 170-80 in the rest of the organization that we're paying in, again, higher than the base premium. So we're spending in excess of almost $400,000 a year in WorkSafe premiums above what the base rate is. So there's this is definitely an area we flagged that needs attention.
Okay, the next line there, employee benefits. So again, part of that collective bargaining process was to provide some enhancements to some of the employment benefits, that extended health and dental coverage. So, with that comes a cost. So that's the cost of that over the whole general operating budget. Then there's just your other general cost increases. And like I was mentioning before, I sort of went through each line, trying to find those areas where, we did need to increase the budget, but also looking for other areas where we might be able to pull back a little bit. So that's the impact of that piece there. Police board and library board, again, those were not any additional, asks from those departments or from those boards. That just represents the status quo going forward.
Not
should also.
including what was mentioned, not including what was mentioned today.
Yeah, so in that police board presentation, you saw there were a couple of numbers there. One was, here's just status quo going forward, and then here's, those additional 2 officers, those types of things. So that was that piece there. So
Really,
this is before that.
Yeah, the decisions you made last year, that's the impact in the future years. I think that's what the chief was speaking to. We budgeted, we're gonna have a quarter of a new FTE last year. That's now a full-time FTE, and they're on an incremental, their wages go up for over the first, I think, 5 years. As each classification, you move up on their salary grid. So if you hire a probationary, I think we call them a 5th class firefighter, 5th class constable now.
Then they go to first
then
class.
you go 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and each one of those have a jump plus the wage increase on top of that.
And then the last line there is BC Transit. So kind of looking at their budget, they give us a 3-year budget each year, and that's the city's portion of BC Transit that we pay. But looking at that going forward, there's some increases there as well. They had some funding that they provided, post-COVID, that was to help us with, lower fare revenue. That has slowly, purposely, we sort of slowly weaned ourselves off of that, but that ends with this next budget. In addition, there's our share of the transit exchange that's included in there. We amortize that over 15 years. We pay our portion over 15 years through our BC Transit agreement. And then there's just other inflationary increases that are included in operating transit, our share of that. Okay. Yeah.
So I think, as you see, we have 1.6 million in additional cost, from the, just as a starting point.
Okay.
So that's where we start, 1.6 million in additional cost just for the status quo.
So then how do we try to mitigate that? What are some of the things that, that the city is able to bring in as far as new revenues and things that we've looked at and work that we've done over the past to try and to bring that down? The first is just, we talk about new construction or non-market change. That's just your assessment growth. So, when we get new assessments, we get new taxation that comes from that. So it's about 150,000 projected for 2025. I think the year 2024 was 200,000, so a little less than it was last year. On average, we seem to be around 100,000, so a little higher than average, but that's what we're looking at.
Like, are you talking about when new homes are built and that all of a sudden comes online?
Correct. Yep, that's right.
Okay.
The second line there is just increased revenue from the hydro dividend. So there's always a growth in that piece that we bring in each year.
Sorry, Can I ask one more question about that?
Yeah.
Can we project, considering the starts that we have going with new home builds in our town, can we project out like a year or 2 from now to say, okay, in like 2 years, that assessment growth is actually going to be 300,000 or 400,000, so then we can actually have that as a cushion going. We don't have it yet, but it will be a cushion coming later, and we count that in, or do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be budgeting for, money that's not, in the bank, or, like that, things can change, right? So, yeah. And there are, with that increased growth and increased revenue, often comes increased costs as well, right?
Everywhere else.
It's difficult sometimes to just think as new construction as like just new revenue. There's usually something that comes along with that, and maybe doesn't come in that year, but it definitely comes over time. You need more police officers, or you need more staff you got more parks, or you need more staff to, clean the streets and
Right. Okay, I understand.
So,
And Chris, maybe could you talk just a bit about the implications of, so we have, a couple of potential developments that would be affordable housing or, funded by BC Housing. And how does that look compared to just a normal private development from a taxation perspective?
Yeah, so the BC housing one, well, and council made some decisions on that in the past to say, you know, the BC housing properties, you know, rather than give them a permissive tax exemption, we would take that taxation and we would put that into an affordable housing fund. So there's that piece to it as well. And when you're looking at supportive housing, that taxation rate is, you know, not what it is for residential. So, yeah.
Well, that's because it's based on the assessment.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
some
and-
of those are, yeah,
Right.
$2, so.
Well, yeah, so the province
Yeah.
on things supportive housing can make it non-taxable fully. And on affordable housing projects, they look at what the, you know, as you saw in the presentation, you know, whatever, 20%, you know, deeply subsidized, you know, 50%, you know, subsidized, and whatever, the 30%, you know, below market. So that's what the rental stream is for that building versus 100% market. So obviously the value of that building is, you know, 50% of what the value of a market rental building. So we start with, you know, that taxation's on a much lower value and drives much lower taxes. And right now the policy of council is, you know, even that lower taxes, we're going to put into a affordable housing fund. So any affordable housing under your current policy is there's zero new taxation to the city.
But there are costs that we incur.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna have to plow that.
And when we
street
have to do all the other costs, then the rest of the taxpayers are paying those costs because that money that might have gone in to cover some of those costs. Now the taxpayers pay.
Right, it's distributed, distributed
Across the commons.
across this town to cover those costs.
So, and just out of clarity, so we kind of get three bills, right? From the city, so to speak. We get the taxes, and then we get the water sewer, and we also have Nelson Hydro. So do those buildings pay water sewer, and do they pay Nelson Hydro?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we don't get the straight up tax. I'm working on my own head. I've been here a lot of years, but it's still complicated.
Okay, the next line there, grants in lieu of taxes. So we do get some other taxation increases as well from, you know, BC Hydro, federal and provincial buildings, TELUS, Fortis, those types of things. So some of those we know at this point. Some are a bit of an estimate based on what our 2024 amounts were. And then there's other just general revenue increases that we've looked at. You know, there's the campground, youth center, and the work that they're doing there. You know, we've got additional rental income here at 310 Ward, and potentially be able to grow that out as well. We kind of action some of the work that we're looking at for the fifth floor.
Chris, are we including in that, or how are we including the as an operator for the regional transit service?
Yeah, so there's a
is it
couple
even lower?
lines going down, and I said KLW there, so.
Okay. And are we charging Trail at all for housing their CAO?
We're
Not.
charging him a carbon tax for driving back and
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah, and where's our swag shop? Yeah, that's Nelson, the city of Nelson swag.
Is parking revenue in there, or is that?
So I've only put things in here that impact taxation. So parking
Okay,
revenue
no,
goes
got it.
straight into
I'm just looking
reserve.
at services,
So
yeah.
trying to pull out
Thank
those
you.
things. I also didn't include anything with resource recovery, even though it's part of our general budget. We had that conversation. So just trying to look at those things that directly impact the taxation part. So
Thanks.
there's a few things that aren't included in here. Yeah, so then that's the additional $703,000 of revenue that we're looking to project for 2025. The next block there are some of the things that we've done to, and I mentioned a couple of these already, to mitigate some of the increases that we're seeing. So I talked about being able to go through and not just apply a blanket inflationary increase to all of our supplies and services, to be a bit more granular with it and looking at only those areas where we see some pressure, and then working with each department to see if there's areas they can tighten their belt a little bit or keep with their existing budget. So there's some savings there. As Councillor Lochtenberg pointed out, there's the Kootenay Lake West contract that we picked up in 2024. So we have had to bring on additional staff for that. You know, we have a transit supervisor, we have a lead hand, but we've also asked our existing staff to do more. And so them kind of spending more time on transit and allocating some more of their time to that part of the business, of that part of the service, we're able to kind of reduce some pressure on other areas of the budget, if that makes sense. And similar to how we talked about with resource recovery and having allocation of time based on your time, where that time is costed to. So, you know, we're able to have some of that funding cover existing wages. But with that comes, you know, more time that's spent on that side of you know, looking at the transit side of things, if that makes sense. And the last,
So I think the bottom line is BC Transit's paying for additional staffing where we haven't increased staffing. So we have more revenue coming in to us and haven't increased the staffing.
But there's a recognition there that that's, you know, what's intended. We're going to have some staff that are going to have to focus their time on this, and they'll compensate us for that.
And is there not like a 15% over and above the?
So we've just sort of worked in what that staff sort of time allocation is, and that's included in there.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah. The other piece there is a little bit of a to be determined, and I think I might have mentioned that earlier today when we look at things like police and when we get a little bit more comfortable with how 2024 is going to look. Is there room there to get a bit more accurate with the budget when we know who's here and who isn't, you know, what positions are going to be vacant, when they'll get filled? So we might be able to work with that a little bit as well. Okay, so those are some of those mitigating factors. The last line I put in there is asset management. So I've kept it in a status quo because I'd like to see us continue that momentum of always putting in more into our capital reserves and not sort of pausing and keeping that flat. You know, we look at the capital projects that we have going on and what's happened to inflation over the last number of years. I think it's important that we don't pause that and we keep moving forward. So we have, you know, we talked about parking, that's a separate piece. But from our taxation, being able to put in that additional $100,000 in 2025 into our equipment reserve or into our building reserve and keep that momentum going. So having that $100,000 line there.
Can I ask a question about, like, let's just say the new sewer plant, and you know, we're building up our capital reserve for that, but of course, obviously, a huge amount of that is going to be grant funded. So if we keep building that up, and then we go for less grants, I mean, I'm just kind of confused. Like, do we do that on a stable basis and then try to, because the cost of building it is going up. Do we rely on that grants are going to match that increase, or do we try to match that increase through our building up our capital reserves more?
I think the growth in our capital reserves will reduce any borrowing that we need to do, but I think we would always go for the maximum amount of grants we could get. Yes, and then, you know, of course, the more we can fund, you know, our portion of that ourselves, it's that trade-off between, you know, we'd have to look at what debt rates are at the time and kind of make a decision, but, you know, what's that trade-off between debt and reserves? But I think the grants piece is sort of the top priority, and that would be what we'd strive to maximize if we can.
You know, and that's why the other thing we're doing is the interest on those reserves stays in that reserve account, so that at least partially offsets inflation by, you know, hopefully the interest rate we're earning is at least covering, you know, 70% of any inflationary costs.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if we can go for maximum grant, then we're not putting maximum into our capital reserves and able to spend that money in other locations.
We're just,
or are we?
Like in water and sewer, what
Yeah.
we're budgeting that we need in grants like, we're only looking at covering our share of those infrastructure grants, right? So on $80 million sewage treatment plant, we're trying to get our 20% of that.
Right, so that's the goal, and then everything, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not trying to get to 50% or 100%. We're trying to get to our 20%
Goal, okay. Thank you. But the goalpost is moving because it is getting more expensive every year.
Yeah, and our 20%, you know, because it's earning interest, is growing as well over the years. Hopefully that, and the grant will be applying at that inflationary amount. So.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So then we have our kind of bottom line. This is our starting point, the net impact on our budget of that 674, 600. So we're starting with that 5.9. Again, there's a few sort of to be determined items in here that we can work with, but this is sort of the base level before we add any of those supplementary items. Again, some will come from operational needs that staff have identified. Some are, you know, have a net positive return as well that we'll kind of look at. And then some, of course, were those items that have come up through various council meetings that we've determined we wanted to kind of postpone until a budget discussion and have that conversation at that time.
Okay.
So if you looked at the police ask, which is 8%, would be starting at a 14% tax increase.
Wow. What was last year's?
The last year's tax increase
That doesn't.
was 5.3.
5.3.
Yeah, and the year before that was 5.8.
And then during COVID, it was actually pretty low. That's what the mayor was saying.
We had it
Gotta catch
zero.
up.
Yeah, we
At a
had a
zero.
zero.
Yeah. Wow.
We're in negative inflation during that period of time as well. Our wage increases were 2%, not 5% or 4%. So yeah, it's a challenging place to start when you're starting at 6%, and we're already, you know, we had police asking for 8%, library, and not quite sure what their ask was.
Yeah, we'll bring forward some of those numbers as well for library. I mean, theirs is a smaller part of the budget, so their asks aren't going to have a big impact. But I know that they were talking about, you know, opening on Sundays, for example. That would come with additional costs.
Are you gonna give us, like, if it's like 14 or 15% where we land, I mean, are you gonna give us some options of, like, maybe some slightly radical moves to, I mean, that's just a huge ask, right?
Yeah. No, I think we'll definitely take a look at that when we reconvene in January to sort of look at these things. And I fully expect that there'll be some conversations on, okay, you know, how do we make this part work, or what are the priorities, how these rank. And even working with the departments, you know, we are trying to be, you know, we're conscious of this. And so it's not a case of just throwing additional things on there. Every one of those comes with some thought behind it as how do we make this manageable? Are there things we can do? Does it create savings in other areas? Is there additional revenue that could come in with that? So all of that is being considered to be able to bring you something that's not just a wish list. There's some positives behind it and some cost benefit.
Hi, I have a question. I know you said it, but as it's like processing, I think I need you to say it again a bit more clearly for me. With regards to the police board status quo increase, the 526,000. So last year we approved whatever amount, I forget the amount, I could pull it up. And
3.8, I think.
And we know that the people weren't getting hired on January 1st. But we allocated that budget as though they were getting hired on January 1st. We did not, because
No.
we knew it was
Yeah.
going to get spread out.
Correct.
So effectively, based on the fact that last year we were like, yes, you can have those people. If they had started on January 1st, then this 526 wouldn't be in next year's budget. We would have already eaten that.
Yeah, so some of that would have been in 2024. So your
Yeah.
5.3 wouldn't have been a 5.3, it would have been something higher.
Yeah.
And then, you know, next year would have been a little bit lower.
Right.
So that's part of it. There's other factors too. There's the, just general wage inflationary type things.
Right.
There's also an assumption in here that from the beginning of January, they're fully staffed. So I've got that in that budget as well. And like I mentioned with this to be determined, the likelihood of that might not be that. So this is on a perfect kind of scenario where all those positions are filled and there's no work safe, there's no folks off.
Gotcha. Chris, because the police board gave a 5% increase above the contract, where's that at?
So yeah, that's in here as well, is that retention pay that they came and spoke about as well, that they wanted to add in there. I'm assuming that that's continuing, so that's placed in there as well. So that's something we didn't know at the time that we did the 2024 budget, is they wanted to continue that into the next year.
That retention pay.
Yes. Yeah.
And, okay, thank you.
You clear?
As mud.
There's always that catch-up of when that triggers and becomes a full-time employee, and so that was why we asked, that's why we could ask again about spacing out new hires. Eventually everybody is 100%, right? The thing would be is that it would be nice to think that if, with policing, is it okay if we spaced out a couple more, the concern would be is every year are they planning to come and ask for a couple more, or are we actually gonna get to the point where we get the number that they want, and then they'll stop asking for a couple of years for another person, and then all we'll have is the salary and inflationary costs and the equipment costs and such like that. But who knows, when that, as the population grows, there could be a continual ask for more police officers every year. And last year when we saw the police budget, we did have it spaced out over 3 years to see what this looks like when you start paying for that one that you hired in June in the following year, right? So we had that 3-year window, and maybe that's something that we could look at again, is that you could draw that up. Because I did ask that when I was at the police board meeting. I said, last time we had 3 years, so you can see what that rolling FTE looks like in terms of the budgetary impact.
Yeah, when I met with the police board, I prepared a couple scenarios for them. One was the one that they had requested where, all of those items were in 1 year. But I also did one that was, what would that look like if it was staggered out over 5 years? Add an officer here, kind of stretch that out. So at the end of 5 years, we were sort of at the same place. It just was the speed at which we got there. So I can bring that back, at least showing what that was, if in a single year, then what the impact is on subsequent years as well, which would be a lot lower, of course.
So with 1% population increase and about 500 people per officer, we should expect that every 5 years we'll see one more, roughly?
That's that.
If the
That's the unknown, right?
people,
Yeah. So that could be what the relationship is. But again,
how do we?
Yeah.
I know.
And what do they consider the number that we have to get to that we would then look at every 5 years? It would be one more.
So there's context for the, that 5% on about 4 million of wages, that's 200,000 of this is that 5% that they, gave above the contract amount. So that's the impact of those decisions, right?
Do we, is there ever, it's something like with the police where you can see this growth happening year over year, and one more officer. Do you need to, rather than just sort of relying on taxation to cover that, do you need to some kind of capital reserve or something?
Nothing other than taxation that pays for that.
Right.
If you want to put it in a reserve to pay for it, you're still taxing.
You're paying for it earlier, that's all.
Yeah. It's just like if it's a continuous growth, then we can plan for that, but it just seems like a big tax hit every year.
I wonder if in our communication we can just set the context for people both for this year and then future years, which is there's inflation. Obviously, that's kind of a baseline that we have to just account for. Then there's sort of the growth in protective services as they experience or make demands related to the fentanyl crisis and these other things. Then there's a kind of a premium on that as we invest in protective services. There's obviously then on top of that potentially catching up on aging infrastructure. Just really, really clearly lay out the context that this percent above inflation,
Always.
whatever that is going to continue for a while and just recognize across society, this is, compounding effects of whether it be a declining dollar and anything we're purchasing from the US creates premiums, like all of these compounding pressures. Just get ready for it. This is just what we have to, I think it's the shock that catches people. Like, fuck, I didn't expect another 7%, but.
Oh, that's what I told the police chief when I saw the police budget. I was like, wow. I said, I just have to say, council's gonna go, wow.
Wow.
And they were like, well, they are? And I'm like, yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm having a wow moment.
Yeah.
Well, we're here, and I know I missed the police part to do the river treaty stuff, but it does make me think, to your point, Jesse, like, the second direction here, community engagement, inclusion from the board, but also, what does that programming look like to involve the community in taking more responsibility or being responsible, or maybe in a sense, maintaining the current level of what we used to do to keep our community safe. And it comes to that intersection around land use planning for the downtown, as we've kind of had a shift going on in how the buildings are used. Downtown, we have less neighbors, we have less eyes, we have less people that live in Baker Street itself, and are therefore more present, and it's more alive. When we're making those investments in dealing with the poverty crisis in town, those corners and streets now have people that are part of those neighborhoods, and how does that have an impact? And what does that look like in terms of activating community when responding to the different kinds of human encounters that occur on Baker Street? I know we had some discussions about activating the chamber and getting supports for the business community, so they know how to deal with certain situations and who to call, so it's not going straight up to the very tippy top of response all the time.
Yeah,
And I think that's like, how do we empower more so the community is just more efficiently and effectively run, and it's a shared thing, without creating vigilante roaming crowds of
I think we had a very fulsome discussion about that, and even Councillor Lockenberg talked about resiliency and businesses taking some responsibility for their own resiliency. So, so we had a long session, and it's unfortunate that you had the conflict. So I would watch it, because there was good points raised by Councillor Lockenberg. Councillor Pinero asked some of those same questions. So it was pretty fulsome in terms of covering off the social aspects and contemplating what can be done as a community. So, yeah, I would really.
That's going to find its way reflecting itself through the police public engagement stuff. Is that a story
I think
you
that
can
would
take
be
back to the
that would
board?
be the sitting on the police board. That would be the feeling that I am getting from the board. The board would like to do some sort of public engagement, perhaps, around the strategic plan now that it's there. And so that's definitely on their work plan. And I think we have a very, for the first time since I've been there, so I've been there for 2 years, and this is the first time just within the last 3 months that we've actually had a full police board. So for 20 months, we had, at one meeting I came to, we had 3. I said, do we have some kind of quorum requirement? And it's like, well, the body's in the room. We had 3 people in the room for a police board meeting because we didn't have any police board members. Now it's full, and I think they're very skilled. I think the skill set around the table is very good. And so I think that now the police board can actually have these discussions. Just like anything else, you can't have these discussions with any depth when there's nobody around the table, you're just talking to yourself. So I think that you'll see more activity coming forward in the new year.
Can I just add this last thing? To come back to my point about sort of setting the expectations for future tax increases, this one and then future. I think that helps to communicate 7% is going to be the new norm for a little while, unless we have some big development project of really top of the market housing that's going to generate income. Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking
You know what I'm talking about. I don't gotta say it. I don't gotta say it.
Don't say it.
That is the reality of we, when we don't have large new developments is.
Right.
And the rest of us are paying those higher taxes. It's just-
And the unfortunate thing about that too, Councillor Longberg, is that, yeah, we can have the whatever big expensive development is, but really the buck would be in is if we had a really large industrial
Yeah.
something happen,
Yeah.
which is not going to
Not
happen in the
gonna
city of
happen.
Nelson. But I mean,
Clearly stated.
really, because it's a kind of like you're talking about a dollar when you're talking about residential versus the like $100 if it was commercial, right? So
Yeah.
even a big expensive place only pays so much residential, and then also that balance of when Councillor Woodward asked about, could we go look forward on saying, well, we're going to have this development and they'll bring in that much, but there's still the outflow of now you have to have sewer capacity and you have to have hydro capacity and you have to have everything else, so it does diminish it. Whereas
But just on that, just because this is going to be a live conversation, so it will be helpful, especially over the holidays, we go to Christmas parties when this comes up. Would a development that's no longer a non-profitly owned society, that doesn't that shift, because we're in terms of the tax
Yeah.
base,
Oh, yeah.
and then potentially the commercial
like the tax
components
on the
of
golf
it.
course is going to be the tax on the golf course. They're going to be paying the full ride.
They're going to pay the full ride, and with the upgrades, would that increase the assessment, like on that? Like if they do a big crazy
As they do
upgrade?
that, yeah.
Yeah. So then if there's like a spa and everything else,
Well,
would that?
They said it
commercial?
was a $500 million development.
Yeah. So
That's
that should be
500
pretty
million in
significant.
New taxes. Or
Yeah. Okay.
assessment base.
I would just,
Okay.
just caution, we are still, in some ways, even that model is trapped in the, if we build more new things, we'll attain some sort of, there's a bump there at the beginning, but, and it's been taken out by some of the capital costs too, but we're still chasing, it's kind of like vertical subdivisions to do more. And I'm just,
Yeah.
there's ways to run it more.
It's an interesting cocktail Christmas discussion to have with your
Let us
buddies.
know how that goes.
Yeah.
If anyone gets you a drink after.
But I mean, as just the pretext, because this is what we're talking about. Like this budget tax increase is more than people have expected to pay. I mean, historically, certainly over the last term, these are coming in a lot higher than we've had to deal with in the past, and they're likely to continue, I assume. So then what?
Yeah,
Like
and that
people
was
are like,
my-
I'm maxed out. We're like, well, you know what? We need more taxes.
Yeah.
And we're not going to.
Or
if it's
or
either
less
raise
no,
your taxes
or less
find-
services.
Or less services,
Right?
yeah.
Like it
Or
goes, that
find
thing goes
other-
both ways, and that's what I was saying is that, this tax issue is the fact that we weren't probably where we should have been because we were trying to be really like austere and mindful
Yeah.
and whatever, and now
during COVID.
now it's coming to roost that that 8% of inflation that happened in 2022 we're now paying for in 2025, right? Because we were being
Generous.
mindful.
Yeah.
Well, and there's, what I've seen people do is they see an increase, they see large taxes, they see it over time, they have that conversation writ large, and then they're kind of like, well, I'm going to call the cops to come clean up the poop that ended up outside of my business, not do it myself, because someone else is paying, because I'm paying so much.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that expectation shifts into I should have more people come and do things for me, which drives further costs.
But I've had this conversation
Yeah.
far too often where people have said that the development up at the golf course is going to actually raise my taxes.
Right.
And I'm already maxed out, and you're going to do this. It's going to raise our taxes to
Yep.
pay for it, and so having
That's fair.
a way of talking about this.
Yeah, that's fair.
But won't it? Because property values go up
Why
and
would it?
therefore
No.
taxes.
No, that property values going up and taxes are not the same.
No.
It's
Might
relative
increase
value.
their RD taxes.
Every year we actually lower that
Assessment,
tax
yes.
rate because assessed values go up higher than
Yeah.
taxes go. So
we
you
don't
see, if you
need-
looked at the tax rate over time, it's actually lower than it was
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And we adjust the per thousand down.
Yeah.
So we basically say, how much taxes do we
Right.
need to collect? What's our assessment? The rate that we charge everybody falls out of those two numbers.
The danger is your RD taxes might start increasing because you might start rising.
The assessment.
Yeah, because the rural area's been rising up now to match us over the last
Yeah.
15, 20 years of
I wouldn't
increase.
exactly say the rural area, our rural area.
Yeah.
Our rural area.
Yeah.
So they're now
have impact
carrying
on
a
us.
burden and they're looking at it and they're like, oh my God, this is so expensive, all these things we approved in the past that Nelson was paying for.
There's-
Now
there's
I
a bit
sound
of-
like the old guys around
There's
there.
a bit of,
But that's the perniciousness, is that we might see project, we might adjust it internally, but then we're carrying more waste, we're carrying more
but
recreation, we're
only,
carrying more.
only temporarily, because we rise first to kind of match the immediate area, and then it drifts outward to the regional district and they catch up. But it's really important, Councillor Pinheiro, in our communication to the public, that people, I'd say the majority of people don't seem to understand that. They assume that when property values go up, taxes go up.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly trying to no, that's not right at all. And so I think a lot of the opposition we're having about the development, potential development, is based on that idea, which is fundamentally wrong.
Not totally just based on that idea.
No, I didn't say
I think
that.
it's the
I
thing
said
they
some
reach
of it.
for.
I said some of it. And I think this is the thing that we're going to be wrestling with. If we want to oppose developments like that, or oppose developments that are at the top end of the market, then we just have to reconcile that burden of increased taxes are going to be shared amongst people in the middle and lower. And the one advantage of having that kind of development happen is that they take more of the overall burden of tax. So I think I'm not landing one way or the other in terms of what it's going to do culturally, but I just, in the context of this budget discussion, I think it's important to.
But then we also have to might have to get comfortable with just saying no to services. I mean, if we're trying not to have a 15% tax increase, it's going to be painful, but maybe we have to say, actually, we can't do it. And we want to keep our taxes at, say, 8 or 9%, so we can't actually do that service. It's just not feasible.
This doesn't include any increased services.
No.
But we need to examine the services we have.
I think you've hit on two of the fundamental things of running a municipality there. One is that you have to figure out what your level of service is for different items, right? Because then you know what you're actually purchasing for or taxing for. So, Councillor Tate made a really good point at one of our last meetings where she said that you can't we can't have the best at everything. We get that everybody wants to come in and talk to us and they want the best version of that. That's just not financially realistic, right? So you have to understand what kind of service level you're going for. And then the second piece of that is fundamentally, with the municipality, if you're going to continue to offer new services or services go up, one of the main ways that you control those costs is by growth of that municipality. So as much as you would love that municipality never to grow, if that's the case, then you are stuck with that same populace paying for that bill for whatever increased services they are. Whereas if you increase the populace and the land that's developed, I should say, the development, then you're actually spreading that out amongst more people, so those costs don't actually go up.
I would love to see that like in an infographic kind of cartoon, and we just deliver that to the community and saying, this is kind of our decision as a community, because I feel like what's happening is people want no growth, they want lots of services, and they want the best services, as Councilor Tate said, and that just doesn't work.
Or no increase in taxation.
And no increase in taxation.
So on some level also, if you're increasing population by a significant amount, your services have to grow with it.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard the fire
Not the level
department
of service, though.
say exactly that, right? The police and the fire are great examples of that. If you have too many people and the buildings get too tall and that's a whole other fire engine or something like that, it's not quite that,
Well, it's absolutely right.
It's not linear, but it grows like that.
Yeah.
As population goes up, costs don't go up at the same rate.
Yeah,
And
and
we can have infill. That's the best development for us.
right, because then there's not a lot of infrastructure
We're not building a new
costs
street.
that are going in.
We're not
Green-
plowing a new street.
Yeah.
We're not fixing a new boulevard.
So
Street
laneway
trees still
houses
the-
are
all
great.
Well, and that's why
Infill,
that's why
duplexes,
density works, right? That's why
triplexes.
going up on that same property works,
or quadruplexes, or
right? Like if these ones they're looking at, well, Fell Street, there's some work to be done up there, but these if you built a 6-story building there, that highway didn't change, the street beside it didn't change, we're not plowing anymore, they're paying for their water and sewer and garbage collection and all those things. So, that's why infill is the best, new subdivisions cost, because you have roads and all these new things that you didn't have before that you have to
Pipes go
service.
right to the property line.
And we use our parks better, and we use our
Everything-
rec facilities
everything's,
better, and
yeah.
we use, all those things are.
And
positive.
interestingly, with regards to the don't raise my taxes, I would say that this rec study has brought to the surface that there are certain values in the community that people are willing to pay for and maybe are wondering why we didn't pay for it before. And so that like there is an opportunity to figure out what are the community values and where do we, how do we address those? And sometimes it does come with a tax increase. So
And-
there is that opportunity as well.
Yeah, and, maybe our communities changed because, to be fair, on the rec side, previous councils went out to the community on 3 or 4 occasions, and ultimately, they said no, that we're not willing to invest in those facilities.
To a vision, to a vision of the day.
I'm
No,
interested to
exactly. That
see
was
how
the
much
people at that time.
money will come forward once it is asked for.
That's the question, right?
That is the question.
So council,
Yeah.
I think we've had a wax and wane philosophically on how we approach the messaging.
That's how we do it in Nelson.
About a potentially significant tax increase. And so thank you that now we've got interesting material for Christmas cocktail parties and the like going forward. And we will get a package on the 20th. You've obviously heard, if it's gonna look like this, how to deliver the message, that'd be good to hear about that. And then we'll be back in January for more fulsome discussions about the budget. But at this point, this is our last gathering till next Tuesday, but this is our last official meeting in this room until January the 7th. And so hopefully we'll see you all on Tuesday at the annual reception. And yes, other than that, it's been another great year, and 2025 is just around the corner. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Woodward, seconded by Councillor Tate. All those in favor? Okay, thank you.